Why the Eagle Defends Americans in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16, from the Gutenberg Project. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by JoBeth McKee. Why the Eagle Defends Americans by Mabel Powers. Many, many moons before the white man came, a little Indian boy was left in the woods. It was in the days when animals and men understood each other better than they do now. An old mother bear found the little Indian boy. She felt very sorry for him. She told the little boy not to cry, for she would take him home with her. She had a nice wigwam in the hollow of a big tree. Old Mother Bear had 2 cubs of her own, but she had a place between her great paws for a third. She took the little papoose, and she hugged him warm and close. She fed him as she did her own little cubs. The boy grew strong. He was very happy with his adopted mother and brothers. They had a warm lodge in the hollow of a great tree. As they grew older, Mother Bear found for them all the honey and nuts that they could eat. From sunrise to sunset, the little Indian boy played with his cub brothers. He did not know that he was different from them. He thought he was a little bear too. All day long, the boy and the little bears played and had a good time. They rolled and tumbled and wrestled in the forest leaves. They chased one another up and down the bare tree. Sometimes they had a matched game of hug, for every little bear must learn to hug. The one who could hug the longest and the tightest won the game. Old Mother Bear watched her dear children at their play. She would have been content and happy, but for one thing. She was afraid some harm could come to the boy. Never could she quite forget the bear hunters. Several times they had scented her tree, but the wind had thrown them off the trail. Once, from her bare tree window, she had thrown out rabbit hairs as she saw them coming. The wind had blown the rabbit hairs toward the hunters. As they fell near the hunters, they had suddenly changed into rabbits, and the hunters had given chase. At another time, Mother Bear crossed some partridge feathers to the wind as the hunters drew near her tree. A flock of partridges went whirling into the woods with a great noise, and the hunters ran after them. But this day, Mother Bear's heart was heavy. She knew that now the big bear hunters were coming. No rabbits or partridges could lead these hunters from their bear trail, for they had dogs with 4 eyes. Foxhounds have a yellow spot over each eye, which makes them seem double-eyed. These dogs were never known to miss a bare tree. Sooner or later, they would scent it. Mother Bear thought she might be able to save herself and her cubs, but what would become of the boy? She loved him too well to let the bear hunters kill him. Just then the porcupine, the chief of the animals, passed by the bare tree. Mother Bear saw him. She put her head out of the bare tree window and called to him. He came and sat under the bare tree window and listened to Mother Bear's story of her fears for the boy. When she had finished, Chief Porcupine said he would call a council of the animals and see if they could not save the boy. Now the chief had a big voice. As soon as he raised his voice, even the animals away on the longest trails heard. They ran at once and gathered under the council tree. There was a loud roar and a great flapping of wings, for the birds came too. Chief Porcupine told them about the fears of Mother Bear and of the danger to the boy. "Now," said the chief, "which one of you will take the boy and save him from the bear hunters?" It happened that some animals were present that were jealous of man. These animals had held more than one secret council to plan how they could do away with him. They said he was becoming too powerful. He knew all they knew, and more. The beaver did not like man, because men could build better houses than he. The fox said that man had stolen his cunning and could now outwit him. The wolf and the panther objected to man because he could conceal himself and spring with greater surety than they. The raccoon said that man was more daring and could climb higher than he. The deer complained that man could outrun him. So when Chief Porcupine asked who would take the boy and care for him, each of these animals in turn said that he would gladly do so. Mother Bear sat by and listened as each offered to care for the boy. She did not say anything, but she was thinking hard for a bear. At last she spoke. To the beaver she said, "You cannot take the boy. You will drown him on the way to your lodge." To the fox she said, "You cannot take him. You would teach him to cheat and steal while pretending to be a friend. Neither can the wolf or the panther have him, for they are counting on having something good to eat. You, dear, lost your upper teeth for eating human flesh, and too, you have no home. You are a tramp. And you, raccoon, I cannot trust, for you would coax him to climb so high that he would fall and die. No, none of you can have the boy." Now a great bird that lives in the sky had flown into the council tree where the animals were speaking, but they had not seen him. When Mother Bear had spoken, this wise old eagle flew down and said, "Give the boy to me, Mother Bear. No bird is so swift and strong as the eagle. I will protect him. On my great wings I will bear him away from the bear hunters. I will take him to the wigwam of an Indian friend, where a little Indian boy is wanted." Mother Bear looked into the eagle's keen eyes. She saw that he could see far. Then she said, "Take him, eagle. I trust him to you. I know you will protect the boy." The eagle spread wide his great wings. Mother Bear placed the boy on his back, and away they soared, far from the council woods. The eagle left the boy, as he had promised, at the door of a wigwam where a little Indian boy was wanted. This was the first young American to be saved by an American eagle. The boy grew to be a noble chief and a great hunter. No hunter could hit a bear trail so soon as he, for he knew just where and how to find the bear trees. But never was he known to cut down a bear tree or to kill a bear. However, there were many wolf, panther, and deer skins that hung in his lodge. The hunter's wife sat and made warm coats from the fox and beaver skins which the hunter father brought in from the chase. But never was the hunter, his wife, or his children seen to wear a bear skin coat. End of Why the Eagle Defends Americans in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16.
North Cornwall, Fairies and Legends in Myth and Legends Around the World, Collection 16, from Gutenberg.org. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by the one who wanders. The Adventures of a Piskie in Search of His Laugh by Ennis Tregathan. Introduction. The tales contained in this little volume of North Cornwall fairy stories by Ennis Tregathan are either founded on folklore or they are folklore pure and simple. The scene of the first story is laid against the ancient walls and gateways of grim Dundadgel, Thrond along the sea, and other places not quite so well known by those who live beyond the Cornish land, but which, nevertheless, have a fascination with their own, especially Dosmar Pool, where Tregeagle's unhappy spirit worked at his hopeless task of emptying the pool with a crozon or limpet shell that had a hole in it. This large inland lake, 1 mile in circumference, is of unusual interest, not only because of Tregeagle's legend that centres around Dosmar, but from a tradition which many believe that it was to this desolate moor, with its great tarn, that Sir Bedivere, King Arthur's faithful knight, brought the wounded king after the last great battle at Slaughter Bridge on the banks of the Camel. A wilder and more untamed spot could hardly be found in Cornwall than Dosmar Pool and the barren moors surrounding it. As one stands by its dark waters, looking away towards the bare granite-crowned hills and listening to the wind sighing among the reeds and rushes and the coarse grass, one can realize to the full the weird legends connected with it, and one can see in imagination the huge figure of Tregeagle bending over the pool, dipping out the water with his poor little limpet shell. The Tregeagle legends are still believed in. When people go out to Dosmar Pool, they do not mention Tregeagle's name for fear that the giant will suddenly appear and chase them off the moors. On the golden spaces of St. Minver Sand Hills, the legends about this unearthly personage are not so easily realized, except on a dark winter's night, when the wind rages fiercely over the dunes, and one hears a fearful sound, which the natives say is Tregeagle, roaring because of the sand ropes that he made to bind his trusses of sand are all broken. St. Minver is not only known for its connection to the legend of Tregeagle, but it is one of the many parishes beloved by the small people, or fairy folk, with whom Ennis Tregathan's little book has mostly to do. Piskies danced in their rings and on many a cliff and common, and more, in that delightful parish, and on other wild moors, commons, and cliffs, in many another parish in North and East Cornwall. Fairy horsemen, locally known as night riders, used to steal horses from farmers' stables and ride them over the moors and commons till daybreak, when they left them to perish, or to find their way back to their stalls. Numberless stories of the little ancient people used to be told, which the cottagers often repeated to each other on winter evenings as they sat around the peat fires, and some of these Ennis Tregathan has retold. The author writes concerning them, "Many of the legends were told me by very old people long since dead. The legend of the Doombar was told me when I was quite a small child by a very old person born late in the 18th century. The one of the giant Tregeagle came, I think, from the same source, but it's too far back to remember. I only know it was one of the stories of my childhood, as were also the mole legend and some of the Piskie tales, handed down from a dim past by our Cornish forebearers." The legends about the Piskie people were very old, and some assert today that the tales about the Piskies were tales of a pygmy race who inhabited Cornwall in the Neolithic period, and that they were answerable for most of the legends of our Cornish fairies. If this be so, the older stories are legends of the little stone men. The legends are numerous. Some of them are very fragmentary, but they are nonetheless interesting, for they not only give an insight into the world of the little ancient people, but they also show how strongly the Cornish peasantry once believed in them, as perhaps still they do. For, strange as it may seem, in these matters-of-fact days, that there are people still living who not only hold that there are piskies, but say that they have actually seen them. One old woman in particular told me not many months ago that she had seen little bits of men in red jackets on the moors where she once lived. She used to be told about the piskies when she was a child, and the old people of her day used to tell how the bits of men crept in through the keyhole of moorland cottages when the children were asleep, to order their dreams. These stories are given to the world in the hope that many, besides children for whom they are specially written, will find them interesting, and all lovers of folklore will be grateful to know that the iron horse and other modern inventions have not yet succeeded in driving away the small people, nor in banishing the weird legends from our loved land of haunted charm. The Adventures of a Piskie in Search of His Laugh. A Soft Cradle of Old Tales. W. B. Yeats. The moon was shining softly down on the grey ruins of King Arthur's castle by the Tintagel Sea, and on hundreds of little piskies dancing in a great piskie ring on the mainland, known as Castle Gardens. In the centre of the ring stood a little fiddler, fiddling away with all his might, keeping time with his head and one tiny foot. The faster he played and flung out the merry tune on the quiet moonlit night, the faster the piskies danced. As they danced, they almost burst their sides with laughter. Their laughter and the music of the little fiddler was distinctly heard by an old man and his wife, who then lived in the cottage near the castle. One piskie, somewhat taller than a clothes peg, was the best dancer there, and his laugh was the merriest. He was dancing with a piskie about his own size, who could hardly keep step with his twinkling feet. As the piskies careered around and round the piskie ring, a tiny chap, who was the best dancer and had the merriest laugh, suddenly stopped laughing, and his little dancing feet gave under him, and down he went in a crash, dragging his little companion with him. Before they could pick themselves up, the piskies, who were coming on behind, not seeing the two sprawled on the ring, fell on them, and in another moment little Fiddler Piskie saw a moving heap of green-coated little bodies and a brown tangle of tiny hands and feet. So amazed was he at such an unusual sight that he stopped fiddling and let his fiddle slip out his hands unnoticed on the grass. When the little men had picked themselves up, except the one who had caused the mishap, they began to pitch into him for tumbling and causing them to tumble, when something in his tiny face made them stop. "What made you go down on your stump jacket, like when you're dancing so beautifully?" asked the piskie, not unkindly. "I dunno," he answered, looking up at his little brother Piskie, with a strange expression on his face, which was pinched and drawn and pale as one of their own piskie stools, and instead of a laugh in his little dark eyes, there was misery and woe. The strange expression in his eye quite frightened the piskies, and one said, "What's the matter with you? You're looking worse than a cat in a fit." "Am I?" said the poor little piskie. "I am feeling quite queer. 'Twas a queerness that made me fall on my little stump jacket. Am I ill like those great men and women creatures we sometimes entice in the bogs with piskie lights?" "We've never heard of a piskie getting ill or sick," said a little brown piskie, "have we?" Turning to speak to the little fiddler, who had come over to his companions, bringing his fiddle with him. "We most certainly haven't," answered the little fiddler. "Then what's the matter with me, if I'm not sick?" asked the little piskie, who was looking so queer. "Perhaps Grandfather Piskie will be able to tell you, for I can't," said the little fiddler. "Where's Grandfather Piskie?" asked the poor little sufferer. "I'm afraid I'm getting worse, for all the dance has left my legs." "Grandfather Piskie's over on the island," cried little Piskie. "So he is," said all the other piskies, sending their glances in that direction, where, on the edge of the beetling cliff, facing the castle gardens, stood a tiny old man, with a white beard flowing down to his bare little feet. He was dressed, as were all the other piskies, in a bright green coat and a red stocking cap. He disappeared into a pisky hole the piskies had dug in the cliff, which led down to an underground passage between the island and the mainland, and very soon he reappeared from another hole in Castle Gardens, a few feet from where the little piskies were anxiously awaiting him. "Were you not fiddling, dancing, and laughing?" asked the little Whitebeard, winking his eyes on the silent little pisky crowd, standing near their little pisky brother, who was looking so queer. "You're waiting precious time, standing there doing nothing. Before a great while, the moon will have set over Trevose, and the time for merry-making and high-jinks will be over," he added, as not a pisky spoke. "We're not fiddling, dancing, and laughing because of something that's befallen our little brother," said the tiny fiddler at last, pointing to the poor little pisky who had raised himself to a sitting position and was seated on the pisky ring. "He's a rum-looking old customer, sure enough," said the old Whitebeard, glancing in the direction of the place where the little fiddler pointed. "What's the matter with him?" "That's what we want to know," asked the little fiddler. "Come have a closer look at him, Grandfer Pisky." And Grandfer Pisky came. "What's the matter with him?" asked one of the piskies, when the Whitebeard had stared down a minute or more on the little atom of misery sitting humped up on the edge of the great green ring, like a toad on a hot shovel. "You're so old and wise. Will you be able to tell us what ails him, if anybody can? He thinks he's sick like the big people. We lead a fine dance around the fields and commons sometimes." As Grandfer Pisky stood stock still before the little afflicted pisky, winking and blinking, and solemnly shaking his head. "He's not sick like the people whom you spoke," said the Whitebeard at last. "He has the make-outs," shrilled a little voice, with a laugh somewhere in the background. "No, he hasn't the make-outs, you impudent little rascal," the Grandfer Pisky, without lifting his gaze from the poor little fellow on the edge of the ring. "That's a complaint from which you apparently suffer." "What has he?" asked the tiny fiddler, impatiently scraping his fiddlestick over his fiddle, as if to emphasize his words. "It isn't what he has, but what he hasn't," said the old Whitebeard, in the same slow, solemn voice. "I was going to say that our poor little brother has lost his laugh." "Lost his laugh?" cried little Fiddler Pisky, and all the other little piskies, and their tiny faces of consternation showed what a terrible thing had befallen their poor little brother. "Yeah, he's had the same misfortune to lose his laugh," said the little old Whitebeard, winking and blinking harder than ever as he stood before the unhappy little pisky who had lost his laugh. "And worse still, he's quite done for till he finds it again." "Well, where's my laugh gone, Grandfer Pisky?" asked the miserable little pisky, who had met with the dreadful misfortune. "Oh, I don't know more than the little man on the moon," answered the tiny old Whitebeard. "But if I were you, I would go back and look for it." "Where must I go and look for my laugh?" asked the poor little pisky. "I have not the smallest idea, but I should go and search for it till I found it." "Will you come with me and search my laugh?" asked the little pisky, with a look of anxiety on his wee dark eyes, as Grandfer Pisky was moving away. "I'm afraid I can't. It's my duty to stop with your brothers and see they don't grow silly and lose their laugh. Besides, it's not quite the thing for an old Whitebeard like me to go travelling about the country with a youngster like you in search of a laugh." "Will you go with me to look for my laugh?" asked the little pisky, fixing his gaze on the tiny fiddler. "I would go with you gladly, if I were not Fiddler Pisky," he answered, touching his fiddle lightly with his bow. "But if I were to go gallivanting up and down the country in search of your laugh, there'd be nobody to play the dancing tune when our brothers dance in the moonshine." "Won't one of you go with me to help me find my laugh?" begged the miserable little fellow, glancing from one pisky to another as they crowded round him. "Oh, we would if we hadn't got so much dancing to do," they said. "We have to dance in every pisky ring from Tintagel Head to Crackington Horn, up St. Jenny's, before the moon grows as small as a wren's claw." "Must I go by myself to search for my laugh?" said the poor little pisky in a heart-breaking voice. "Yes, you must go by yourself to look for your laugh," answered all the little piskies. "You should not have been so selfish as to lose it." And the selfish little brown men, Grandfer Pisky, Fiddler Pisky, and all the other piskies, turned their backs on their unfortunate little brother and ran away across the gardens and over the cliffs towards Bosany, halfway between which was another big pisky ring. And by the poor little pisky, who had lost his laugh, heard in the distance, as he sat all alone in the great grassy place, their merry laughter and the music of Fiddler Pisky's tiny fiddle. He was a very sad little pisky as he listened to the merriment of his little brother piskies, and the moon, sailing along the dark velvety blue of the midnight sky above the ruins of King Arthur's castle and the gardens, never looked down on such a woe-begotten little pisky before. He'd always been happy and gay till now, and having no laugh was such a strange experience that it was no wonder he felt as miserable and wished as he did. As he sat there, all alone, on the ring his own little dancing feet had helped to make, 2 tiny hands were suddenly thrust up out of the small earth heap, half a foot down from where he was sitting. So dainty were the hands that he thought they belonged to one of the little good people, a distant relation of his, and thinking that somehow one had gotten buried under the earth, he got up from the ring to help her out, and, without waiting to say, "Allow me," or anything so polite, he caught hold of the wee hands, and pulling with all his strength, he dragged something very dark and soft out of the earth heap, and saw, to his surprise and disgust, that it was the round, plump body of a mole. He kept his eyes upon the light, and by, when the lantern came rocking over the bog in his direction, he stood up on the edge of the water, ready to call. It disappeared ever so many times among the bog myrtles and willows, but every time it reappeared it was closer. When it came near, enough for him to see the little lantern man inside, he shouted, "Whatever did you drag me out of that wanton hill for, you horrid creature, whoever you are?" cried the mole, who was not as soft as she looked. "It took me 2 hours to throw up that beautiful hill, and now it's fallen down into my tunnel. My work will all have to be done over again, thanks to you." "I'm so sorry," said the pisky. "I saw 2 dinky hands sticking up, and I thought a relation of mine had gotten buried. When I did my best to get her out, I found it was only a want, as the country people call you moles." "You're a want indeed!" exclaimed the mole. "Who are you, pray, to speak so disdainfully?" "If I'm not a want, I was not always the poor thing I am now. Once upon a time I was a very great lady, and because I was foolish and proud and very vain of my beauty, I was turned into a mole. My little hands are the only thing left to me to show who I once was." "I'm very sorry for you," said the pisky, with a strong note of sympathy in his voice, so entirely new to him that he scarcely knew it was he himself speaking. For piskies, although they are merry and gay, are often selfish in the extreme. "I'm more sorry for you than I can say," he went on. "It can't be nice to be only a want, when once you're a beautiful lady. I'm a pisky," as the dark little mole was silent. "A pisky, are you?" she cried, speaking at last. "I remember you little pisky people quite well, and have cause to remember. Once, when I was a grand lady and wore fine clothes, you piskies led me into a bog and spoiled my silken gown. I did not bless you then, and I do not bless you now. You are still up to your tricks, I find, to my cost, for you have done your best to pull down my house about my ears." "I didn't mean to do anything so unkind," said the little pisky. "I'm not merry enough now to play games on anyone." "How's that?" asked the mole. "I've lost my laugh. My heart's heavy as lead," he answered sorrowfully. "Lost your laugh?" cried the mole. "That's very strange." "Oh, yes, it is, and I'm quite done for. So Grandfather Pisky told my little brothers till I find it again."
"Why don't you go and look for your laugh instead of throwing down want hills?" said the mole severely. "It would be more to your credit if you did."
"Well, I suppose it would," replied the Pisky, "but unfortunately I don't know where to go, and I looked for my laugh. Have you seen it?"
"No, I haven't," snapped the mole. "I can't see without my eyes, and I've lost my eyesight through working underground for so many long centuries."
"Do you know anybody who's seen my laugh?" asked the Pisky, "who would kindly tell me where to go find it?"
"I'm afraid I don't," answered the mole, "except the little man in the lantern. He's the most likely person I know to have seen your laugh. He's always flipping about the country in the night time with his little lantern. He sees most things that wander by night. He's a kind-hearted little fellow. If he's seen your laugh, he'll be sure to help you to find it. You know, of course, where the little man is to be found?"
"I've seen his lantern in the marshes sometimes," answered the Pisky. "I saw it rush by a few weeks ago when I and my brothers were lying snug and warm in a great pisky bed at Rough Tor Marsh. But I do not happen to know the lantern man. Would you please come with me to Rough Tor Marsh and ask him if he's seen my laugh?"
"What next will you ask me to do?" cried the mole. "No, I cannot go with you. I'm far too busy to go tramping around the country with a little brown pisky like you in search of a laugh. I have the tunnel to make across Castle Gardens for my dear little baby wants to run about in, and I must do it before the sun shines over the tors. If you really want to find your laugh, you must go and ask the lantern man yourself. The sooner you go, the better, or you may lose the chance to ask him if he's seen it."
"I dare say you're right," said the little Pisky, with a heavy sigh. "But I don't like the idea of travelling all the way from here to Rough Tor Marsh. My feet are heavy like my heart now. I've lost my laugh, and yet I suppose I must go, for I'm a wished poor thing without it. Wouldn't you say so too, Mrs. Mole, if your eyesight wasn't so bad?"
"Mrs. Mole, indeed!" snapped the velvet-coated little creature, raising her tiny hands in anger at such an insult. "I beg to tell you that I am not Mrs. Mole, but I am the Lady Want, and that, although I've fallen from my high estate, I am still a lady of high degree, as my tiny hands bear witness."
And she held them out for him to see. "I'm not up to fine distinctions," said the little Pisky in a humble voice. "No, I beg your ladyship's pardon." The Pisky's sad little voice so appeased the Lady Want that she fully forgave his ignorance, and told him he was quite nice-mannered for a Pisky, and hoped the little lantern man had seen his laugh, and would be able to tell him where to find it. And then her little ladyship disappeared into the molehill, her tiny hands and all. When she'd gone, the little Pisky turned his face toward the east, where the tors rose up dark and shadowy against the moonlit sky. Then he looked back at the great keep, and turned his glance on the castle gardens, where, in the long ago, courtly knights and great ladies walked among the flowers that blossomed there under the shadow of the loopholed walls, and listened, as they walked, to the music of the Tintagel sea, and the great waves that sometimes broke against the dark cliffs, or the headland in which the grim old castle stood, where good King Arthur was born. The little Pisky was saying good-bye to that delightful spot, and, with its soft turf and the beautiful Pisky ring on which he had danced times without number, for the poor lonely little fellow did not know if he should ever come back again. Then he broke off a bit of knapweed stem for a staff to help him on his journey to Rough Tor Marsh, and, before the moon had laid down a lane of silver fire on the rippling waters between Tintagel Head and Trevose, the little Pisky had set out on his travels in search of his laugh. Piskies always travel by night, and after many nights of wandering, the little Pisky, who had lost his laugh, came to the bog country, where he had last seen the little lantern. Very tired and footsore was that little Pisky after his long journey. For having lost his laugh, he had no dance in his feet to help him along, and he felt so done up as he sat by the great bog, or Pisky bed, as he called it, that he had not much care whether he found his laugh or not. But when he had rested a while, he felt better, and looked over at the great marshy place with eager eyes, to see if the little lantern man was anywhere about. To his delight, for far away in the distance, he saw the white gleam of his lantern. Little man in the lantern, please stop. I want to ask you something. But whether the lantern man heard or not, he did not stop, and he and his lantern flipped by the disappointed little Pisky as quick as a witty mouse on the wing, and was lost to sight in the reeds and rushes on the other side of the great marsh. After a while, the little lantern man came back to the place where the Pisky was still standing, and the light from the lantern was brighter and softer than a hedge full of glowworms light shining all at once. As the lantern was passing the little Pisky, he called out louder than before, "Little man on the lantern, please stop. I want to ask you something." But the little lantern man did not stop, and he and his lantern rushed by as quickly as before, and the poor little Pisky followed the rocking lantern with his eyes over the great marsh. Just as he was in despair of the wonderful little lantern coming his way again, it came, and so fast did it come, and so afraid was he of its passing him without making himself heard, that he shouted with all his might, "Please, little lantern man, stop! I want to ask you something." And to his joy, the little lantern man stopped. The door of his little lantern opened wide, and a tiny shining face looked out. "Did anybody call?" asked the lantern man, in a voice so kind that the Pisky's little heart leapt for joy. "Yes, I called," said the little Pisky. "I called twice before, but you did not stop." "I never heard you till now," said the little lantern man. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "I'm an unfortunate little Pisky who's lost his laugh," answered the Pisky, "and I've tramped all the way from Tintagel Head to Rough Tor Marsh to ask you if you've seen it." "Lost your laugh, you poor little chap!" ejaculated the little lantern man in the same kind voice. "How came you to lose it?" The little Pisky told him how he'd lost his laugh, and what Grandfer Pisky had said, and how the mole who'd called herself the Lady Want had told him to come to him. "I would gladly help you to find your laugh, if I knew where it was," said the lantern man, when the Pisky had told him all, "but unfortunately I've never seen it." "Haven't you?" cried the poor little Pisky. "I am disappointed. As you're always travelling about the country in your little lantern, I felt sure you'd seen my laugh." "I only travel the marshy ground," said the little lantern man, still standing in the doorway of his tiny lantern, "and your laugh may not have passed along my way." "Oh, do you happen to know anybody else who's seen my laugh?" asked the Pisky anxiously. "Well, nobody except Giant Tregeagle, of whom I dare say you'll have heard. That unhappy fellow, who, for some terrible wrongdoing, has to dip Dosmar Pool dry with a limpet shell." "Oh, yes, I've heard about the great giant from Grandfer Pisky," answered the little Pisky. "He was a wicked seigneur who once had a fine house in Dosmar Pool, and a great park on Bodmin Moors, and he's often flying about the country with the wicked one at his heels." "The very same," cried the little lantern man. "He travels from east to west, from west to south, and back again. He will be sure to have seen your laugh." "Oh, I'm afraid my laugh's too small for a great big giant to have noticed, even if it passed him," said the little Pisky. "Well, he isn't so big, but what he can see a laugh," said the little lantern man. "You had better go and ask him." "I don't know where he is," said the little Pisky, who was in the most dejected frame of mind. "He's at Dosmar Pool, or was not long since, doing his best to dip the pool dry." "Oh, I'm rather tired of tramping here from Tintagel," said the little fellow, "and I don't feel like going all the way to Dosmar Pool. I've no spring in my legs since my laugh left me," he added, as the little lantern man smiled rather sadly. "I never knew what it was to be so tired and wished before I lost my laugh." "I don't suppose you did, you poor little chap," cried the lantern man. "And you must do all you can to find your laugh. I'm going to Dosmar Pool, or the Magic Lake, as it was called in the long ago, and if you don't mind travelling in my lantern, I'll give you a lift as far as that." "Oh, will you?" exclaimed the little Pisky, his tiny brown face a little brightening as the lantern man smiled. "Oh, you're very kind. I'll go with you gladly." "That's right!" cried the little lantern man, and he held out his hand, which shone like his face, and helped the little brown Pisky into his lantern. When the Pisky was safe inside the lantern, he thought it was the very brightest place he was ever in, even brighter than a fairy's palace, he said. "There's no seat in my lantern except the floor," said the little lantern man, as the Pisky looked about him. "The floor's not uncomfortable, even if you care to sit down. I always sleep on it when my night work of giving light to the poor things that live in the marshes is done." "I'd rather stand, thank you," returned the Pisky. "I can look out of your windows better." "Do as you like, only it is my duty to tell you that you would be safer on the floor. My lantern and I travel so fast that the creatures that fly by night often knock up against us and turn us upside down." The little lantern man shut the door of his lantern as he was speaking, and in another minute they were rushing over the rough Tor marsh at a fearful speed, and the little Pisky had to hold on to the frame of one of the tiny windows to keep himself on his feet. By rough Tor's granite-piled heights the bright little lantern went. On by Bronwilly and Brownwilly it sped, and by many a solitary hill, almost as wild and untamed as old rough Tor itself. Over lonely moors, bogs, rivers, and streams it flew, and rocked and whirled as it went. As it sped on, it bumped against all manner of strange creatures, and once a nighthawk turned the little lantern upside down, and the Pisky found himself standing on his head, with his tiny lean legs sticking up in the air. And he looked so funny that the little lantern man laughed till tears ran down his shining face. And if the Pisky had had his laugh, he would have laughed too. On and on the lantern rushed, zigzagging up and down, down and up, and as it went, strange moths and queer things that go about only by night fluttered their wings against the bright windows and door. Once a widdy mouse, with a face like a cat, looked in, and then vanished into the darkness. And once a short-eared owl gripped the lantern in his talons, but it sped on all the same. About an hour after midnight, the lantern reached Dosmere Pool, which lies on the top of a great lonely moor, surrounded by desolate hills. The moon was only a few days old, and it had set long before the sun had gone down. But it was by no means dark by the big pool, for there was starshine from innumerable stars, and also the light that fell from the wonderful little lantern. The little lantern man stopped his lantern on a boulder by the pool, where was stretched a huge dark form, almost as big as a headland. It was giant Tregeagle, lying face down on the margin of the pool, dipping water with a limpet shell which had a hole in it. The little lantern man opened the door of his lantern, and telling the little Pisky that now was his chance to ask the giant about his laugh, he helped him out. The Pisky stepped up quite close to the great giant, and he looked so tiny beside him that the little lantern man laughed, and said that he was like a god's little cow by the side of a plough-horse. "Why," he said, "his ear alone could make a dozen little chaps like you and me. Now I must be off, and give light to those poor things that want light. Good luck to you, my friend, in finding your laugh." And the little lantern man closed the door of his lantern, which sped away over the big pool, shedding light as it went. The Pisky watched the lantern till it was hidden among the reeds and rushes, and then he turned his face to the giant's ear, and when he had climbed up onto it, he shouted, "Giant Tregeagle, I'm poor little Pisky who's lost his laugh. Please stop dipping water for a minute and tell me if you've seen it." But the giant took no notice of the little Pisky, and went on dipping out water with a limpet shell that had a hole in it. Again and again the tiny brown Pisky shouted into the giant's ear, but the big giant took no more notice of his little piping voice than if a fly had buzzed close to his ear, and went on dipping. Once more the Pisky shouted with all the voice he had, thrusting his red-capped head into the hollow of the giant's ear as he shouted, Giant Tregeagle, I'm a poor little Pisky who's lost his laugh. Please stop dipping water for a minute and tell me if you've seen it." This time the giant heard, and without pausing for a moment his hopeless task of emptying the pool dry, he said, "What tiny squeak did I hear?" The piskie was too frightened to answer, for Giant Tregeagle's voice was almost as loud as the roar of the breakers breaking in the cavern under King Arthur's castle, and the tiny fellow crouched down in the curl of the giant's ear. "What tiny squeak did I hear?" again asked the giant, and the little piskie, taking his courage in both his hands, answered back as loud as he could. "It was a little piskie who spoke to you, a little piskie who's got the great misfortune to lose his laugh." "A little piskie has lost his laugh, has he?" roared Giant Tregeagle. "Why, that's nothing compared to a giant who's lost his soul." "Have you lost your soul?" cried the little piskie, who, having got the giant's ear, could now make his tiny voice distinctly heard. "Yes, I lost my soul," moaned the great fellow, and his moan shivered over the surface of Dosmer Pool, and made all the sallows that grew beside it shiver and shake, as if a blasting wind had passed over them. And the reeds and rushes, growing in the water, sighed so sadly that the little piskie felt ever so wished, and sighed too. "How did you come to lose your soul, Mr. Giant?" asked the little piskie after a while. "That's a question," answered the giant, beginning again his hopeless task of emptying the pool. "Have you ever looked for your soul?" queried the tiny fellow, who, having lost his laugh, felt very sorry for the unhappy giant, who had lost so precious a thing as his soul. "It was not good to look for my soul when I gave it away in exchange for wealth," cried the giant. "I can never get it back again, unless I empty this big pool of every drop of water that is in it." "And can't you do that? And you, a giant?" asked the little piskie in surprise. "I am afraid I can't with a limpet shell that has a hole in it, and I'm not allowed to use any other." Will you let me help you empty the pool?" asked the tiny piskie. "I'm only a little bit of a chap compared to you, but I know it's God's little cow by the side of a plough horse, the man in the lantern said." And as the giant laughed sardonically, "My dinky hand is nothing for size, but it hasn't a hole in it." "You can help me if you like," said the giant with another sardonic laugh. "It will be perhaps another case of a mouse freeing the lion." "Who knows?" cried the piskie, who took the giant's remark quite seriously, and climbed out of the huge ear. He slid down over the boulder to the pool, and making a dipper of his tiny hand, began to dip out water as fast as he could, and never stopped dipping once, till a movement behind him made him pause, and, looking up, he saw the great big giant on his feet, towering above him like a Tor, with an awful look of rage upon his face. "I can never empty Dosmer Pool with a limpet shell that has a hole in it," howled the giant. "No, not if I dip till the day of doom," and he flung the shell into the pool. As he flung it, a great blast of rage broke from him, and lashed the dark water of the big pool in fury. He howled and howled, and his howls were heard in every part of the lonely waste surrounding the pool, and went roaring round and round the far-reaching moors, and were echoed by the desolate hills. By and by the giant turned his back on the pool, and strode away in the direction of the sea, howling and roaring as he went. The little piskie was so terrified by the giant's roaring that he crept into a water-rat's hole, and never ventured out for a night and a day. The second night, after the giant had gone, he came out of the hole to see if he had returned, but he had not. He was disappointed, in spite of the fright he had received, for the giant had never told him whether he had seen his laugh, and he did not know where to go in search of it, or whom to ask if it had been seen. As he thought about this, he became very miserable, almost as miserable as the unhappy giant who had sold his soul, and he wished with all his heart that the kind little man in the lantern would come by his way again. As he was wishing this, he looked over the big pool, which was very dark and unlit by a single star. when something very soft and bright smote the black water on the opposite side of the pool. Thinking it was the dear little man of the lantern come in answer to his wish, he fixed his gaze upon the brightness, and in a minute or two a little barge shot out from the reeds and came swiftly towards him, and he saw, for piskies can see in the dark like a cat, that the barge was being rowed across the big pool by a little old man. The soft light that smote the water came from the prow of the little craft, and lit up the face of the bargeman, which was half turned towards the piskie, and was very seared and brown. When the barge came near the pool where the piskie was standing, the tiny bargeman said, "Who are you, looking as if you had the world on your back? And what are you doing here this time of night, when all good folk ought to be in bed?" "Oh, I'm a poor unfortunate piskie who's lost his laugh," answered the tiny little piskie, and his voice was very sad. "Oh, it's a dreadful thing to lose your laugh," said the old bargeman. "It is," responded the little piskie. "The little man in the lantern thought so too, and he brought me all the way from Rough Tormarsh to Dosmar Pool in his lantern to ask Giant Tregeagle if he'd seen it." "And didn't you ask Giant Tregeagle that important question, after the little lantern man had brought you so far?" asked the little bargeman. "I did, but he was so troubled about something he'd lost, his soul it was, that he forgot to say whether he'd seen my laugh." "Oh, that's a pity, for the giant is now in St. Minva sand-hills making trusses of sand and sand ropes to bind with them. And when the sand ropes break in his hands, which they're sure to do when he tries to lift them, he'll fly away to Low Bar to work at another impossible task." "How do you know that?" asked the little piskie. The tiny bargeman looked at the green-coated, red-capped little piskie with a strange expression in his dark eyes for a second or two, and then he said, "I've lived so long in the world that I know most things. People who knew me in far-away time called me Merlin the Magician, and I said I had all the secrets in the world in the back of my head." "Well, then you'll be able to tell me where my laugh's gone," struck in the little piskie eagerly. "I was speaking more of the past than the present," said the tiny bargeman. "Since the time in which I spoke, I've lived here by this lake, now called Dosmar Pool. I live sealed up in a stone, into which the lady of the lake shut me till 100 or so years ago." "How very unkind of the lady to put you into a stone," said the little piskie indignantly. "Whatever did she do it for?" "Thereby hangs a tale, which is not good for a small piskie like you to hear," returned the tiny bargeman, with another strange look at his dark, mysterious little eyes. "When Nimue, lady of the lake, shut me up in the stone, like a toad in a hole, she said she thought she'd done it for me, and I should soon die. But Merlin, the man who worked magic, was not so easily got rid of." "And didn't you die?" asked the piskie innocently. "You must have lost your wits as well as your laugh to ask such a stupid question," said the tiny bargeman. "I didn't die, nor should I be sitting in this barge now, but I grew down to the tiny old fellow you see me through working my way out to that dreadful stone. My magical powers have also dwindled, I fear, for there is nothing to what they once were. Therefore I'm no longer Merlin the Magician, but only Merlin the Bargeman of Dosmar Pool." "And I can't you tell me where my laugh is?" asked the little piskie wistfully. "I'm a miserable poor thing without my laugh." "I'm sure you are," said the tiny bargeman, "and I'll do what I can to help you find it. I wasn't shut up in stone all those centuries for nothing, as perhaps you've not lost your laugh for nothing. I'll tell you at once that your laugh has never been near this desolate spot, but it is possible that Giant Tregeagle may have seen it on his wild flight down St. Minver sandhills, or maybe seen it in the Golden Dunes. I advise you to go there and ask him." "How can I get to the sandhills?" asked the poor little Pisky. Oh, it would take me such a long time to get there with no dance in my feet. And there's no little lantern man here to give me a lift in his lantern. You need not trouble your head. Oh, you're to get to the sand hills. Oh, I'll take you near there in my barge. In your barge? Echoed the little Pisky, looking over his shoulder to the long stretch of country between him and the sea, and then at the great pool, set like a cup on top of the moor, with no visible outlet. You're wondering how I can take you to the great outer sea, said the tiny bargeman. For your satisfaction, I'll tell you that there is an underground waterway that leads down to Trebetherick Bay, close to St. Minver Sandhills. I'll take you there in my barge. Oh, you're so very kind, said the little Pisky, looking gratefully at the little old bargeman. My brothers were not nearly so kind. I saw you helping the wicked giant to dip his great mere dry, and I thought so kind a deed deserved another, answered the little bargeman lightly. I told myself as I watched you that I would do you a kindness. So, if you need a kindness, will you let me take you to Trebetherick Bay? Oh, gladly, answered the little Pisky. Get in my barge, then, cried the little old bargeman, and the Pisky scrambled in and sat at the stern of the barge facing the bargeman. I like rowing about this pool, remarked the tiny bargeman, as he put his little craft about and began to row from the shore. It has so many memories. It was here by that mere that the lady of the lake, not the one who shut me up in stone, forged the wonderful Excalibur, the two-handled sword with which the jewelled hilt she gave to King Arthur, who, you know, afterwards ruled all the land. It was here that Sir Bedivere, one of the knights of the far-famed Round Table, flung the sword by order of the wounded king, and it was caught by the lake lady's uplifted arm. It was here. But you're not listening, he cried, breaking off his sentence as he noticed that the little Pisky was not paying attention to anything that he was saying. No, I'm afraid I wasn't, he said, very much ashamed. I'm very dull and stupid since I lost my laugh. You can't be more stupid than where I was shut up in stone, said the tiny old bargeman, and I can well excuse your stupidity. He said nothing more, for just then the barge reached the shore from which it had put off, and, without getting out, he reached over and touched a big stone with an oar. He'd no sooner touched the stone than it sprang back and revealed a dark, deep tunnel, into which the little barge shot like a thing alive. This underground waterway was known to the fair ladies who lived by the pool, and who took away the wounded king in their little ship to the Vale of Avalon, remarked the bargeman when the stone shut itself up behind them. Did they? Asked the little Pisky, trying to look interested. Yes, he answered, and they knew a thing or two about waterway, which will never be revealed to anybody except by the good king, he added half to himself, looking straight before him in the darkness to the narrow passages he steered. The tiny barge, which was a very ancient-looking little craft, with a gilded dragon forming its prow, sped on. But for its size, it might well have been the same little ship to which Merlin, the little old bargeman, had just referred. The waterway was very long and deep, and the water ran so swiftly that the barge did not now require to be rowed. It was also very dark, and the only light that shone was the light from the little boat. The little old bargeman didn't speak again until a roaring fell on their ears. It's the noise of the water breaking on Padstow Bar, he said, as the little Pisky looked frightened. Oh, he thought it was a giant tregeagle howling, gasped the little Pisky. He hasn't tried to lift his sand ropes yet, and he won't begin his howl of rage till he finds how brittle they are, said the little bargeman. And a very good thing for you, he added, for he'll be far too angry to tell you whether he's seen your laugh when the ropes of sand break in his great hands. There, we're close now to the great outer sea, he cried, as the thunder of waves broke more loudly on their ears, and they saw the light of many stars through a narrow opening, and the next minute the little barge came out into Trebetherick Bay. You only got to go up across the hillocks, said the little old bargeman, helping the little Pisky out of the barge. "And if you follow your nose, you'll soon get to where the giant is busy making sand ropes." "Thank you for bringing me," said the little Pisky, but he never knew whether he was heard or not, for the tiny bargeman and his ancient barge vanished as he spoke. The Pisky made haste to follow his nose, and he scrambled up a sandbank and hastened as fast as his feet could take him over the sandy common, till he came to the place where the giant Tregeagle was sitting making sand ropes to bind his trusses of sand, which lay all around him. He was sitting by a hillock, his great head showing just above it, when the Pisky came near. The little Pisky climbed nearly to the top of the hillock, and when he got close to the giant's ear, he shouted, "I am the little Pisky who told you he'd lost his laugh. Please, stop making sand ropes for a minute and tell me if you've seen it." But the giant took no notice of the tiny voice, and went on making his ropes of sand. The little Pisky then got into his ear, and poked his red-capped head into the hollow of it, and again shouted, "I'm the little Pisky who told you he'd lost his laugh, and—" "Ah, the dinky fellow who tried to help me to find my soul," interrupted the great giant, in a voice almost as loud as the waves breaking on the Padstow Doombar. "Yes," answered the Pisky, "and a dinky old bargeman brought me from Dosmer Pool to Trebethwick, that you might answer my question." "I know who you mean, Merlin, the little old master of magic," cried the giant, in evident astonishment, pausing in his work of making a rope of sand to stare at the little Pisky. "Fancy his bringing a tiny fellow like you from Dosmer Pool to Trebethwick Bay in his magic barge. Pigs will fly and sing after this." "He saw me help you dip the pool dry, and said that one kind deed deserved another," said the Pisky, as meek as a harvest mouse. "So he brought me all the way down to St. Minver to know if you'd seen my laugh. Have you seen it, Mr. Giant?" "No, I have not seen it," answered the giant. "Nothing so cheerful as a Pisky's laugh would come near such a mountain of misery as I am. If, by an evil chance, it did come, it would flee far from my dark shadow." "Do you know anyone else who's seen my laugh?" asked the little Pisky, piteously. "Not one, unless your cousins and night riders have," answered the giant, looking at the sand ropes he had just finished lying at his feet. "Now I must begin to bind my trusses of sand." He stopped to lift them as he spoke, and as he tried to take them up, they fell into pieces in his hand. As they crumbled away, his face was awful to see, and he began to howl and roar, and his cries of rage rang over the sand hills and over Trebethwick Bay, and were heard above the noise of waves breaking on the Padstow Doombar. Those roars of rage and anger so frightened the people living in the villages of the neighbourhood of the common that they shook in their beds. And as for the little Pisky, he was so terrified by what he had heard and seen that he tumbled over the hilltop, up which he had climbed, to get into the giant's ear. When he had picked himself up, Giant Tregeagle was flying away like an evil bird toward the south. The dawn broke soon after the giant had gone, and the Piskies always hide by day. He hid himself under a clump of tamarisk, and stayed there until the dark and stars came again. When he came out, he remembered what the giant had said, that perhaps his cousins, the night riders, had seen his laugh. The moon being several days older than when the kind little lantern man had taken him to Dosmer Pool, it was now shining brightly over the common, and he knew if the night riders were in the neighbourhood of the sand hills, then they would soon be riding over the common. As he was gazing about with wistful eyes, a young colt came galloping along with scores of little night riders astride his back, and as many more hanging on his mane and tail. The night riders, who were little people no bigger than piskies and quite as mischievous, had taken the colt from a farmer's stable close to the common, and were enjoying their stolen ride as only night riders could. As they and the colt drew near, the little Pisky stood out in the moonshine and shouted at them. Night riders, please, stop! I want to ask you something." But the little night riders were enjoying their gallop too much to listen or stop, and they flew by like the wind. The colt was fresh and galloping like mad, and soon went round the common and back again, and as he was galloping by, the piskie once more shouted to the little night riders to stop, but they took no heed, and once more flew by like the wind. Ever so many times the colt galloped round the sandy common, leaping over the hillocks in his mad gallop, and each time he passed, the little piskie stood out in the moonshine and called out, but the night riders took not the slightest notice, nor pulled up the colt to see what he wanted. At last, when the piskie had given up all hope of the night riders stopping, the colt, who was quite worn out with the galloping so hard and round the broken common, put his foot into a rabbit hole, and came down with a crash, with many little riders on top of him. One little night rider, who happened to be astride the colt's left ear, was pitched off at the piskie's feet. He looked as bright as a robin in his little red riding coat, brown leggings, and his bright green cap with a wren's feather stuck in its front. "What wished little beggar are you?" "I'm the poor little chap who's lost his laugh," answered the piskie. "I shouted every time you galloped the colt past here to ask if you'd seen it, but you never stopped." "Of course you did not stop galloping because the piskie called," said the little night rider. "How came you to be such a gawk as to use your laugh?" "I have no idea," the piskie returned. "I only know it went away all of a sudden, and I've been searching for it ever since. Have you seen my lost little laugh?" "No, but Gentford night rider may have," answered the little night rider. "He's got wonderful eyes for seeing things that are lost." "Is Gentford night rider here?" asked the piskie, sending his glance in the direction of the colt, which was almost smothered with night riders, some standing on the side as he lay, others still in the stirrups they had made in his tail and mane. "He was on top of the colt's tail a minute ago," answered the little night rider, following the piskie's glance. "There he is," pointing to a tiny fellow with a bushy beard coming toward them, carrying a tamarisk switch in his hand, with which he lashed the air as he came. He wore a red riding coat, green breeches, red cap, and a feather like the other little night riders. "What woe-begotten little rascal are you?" asked the old greybeard, staring hard at the piskie. "Piskie's lost his laugh," answered the little night rider for him, "and he had the impertinence to want us to stop galloping to tell him if we'd seen it." "Were you very foolish to lose your laugh?" said the Ganther night rider, standing in front of the unhappy little piskie. "How did you manage to lose it?" The poor little fellow, without lifting his eyes from the sandy ground, told him. "You're in queer lane, my son," said the Granfer night rider, when he had told him how he had lost his laugh, "and I would not want to give a grain of corn for you." "Wouldn't you?" wailed the poor little piskie. "No, I wouldn't, nor half a grain neither." Quite a crowd of scarlet-coated little night riders had gathered near the piskie by this time, and had listened to all that was said. One little night rider asked if a piskie had ever had the misfortune to lose his laugh before. "Yes, once, a long time ago," answered the old greybeard, fixing his eye on the little piskie, who trembled beneath his gaze. "And what was worse still, he never found it again. So very unhappy was the little fellow without his laugh, and so miserable did he make everybody with his bewailings, that at last the piskie tribe to which he belonged sent out a command that whoever found him wandering about the countryside was to take him in charge as a piskie vagrant, put him in a piskie bag, and hang him upside down like a woody mouse in the first cavern they came to. He was found, put into a piskie bag, and hung up in a cavern, and there he is still. There he will hang till there are no more small people." "Has the order been given for this little piskie vagrant to be taken up and trussed in that manner?" asked another little night rider. The poor little piskie did not want to hear the answer, but took to his heels and ran as fast as he could to the north, and the little night riders, who were still standing on the colt, watched him till he was out of sight, and Grandfer night rider and all the other little night riders yelled after him to stop, but he did not stop. The piskie ran and ran, and he never stopped running till he came to Castle Gardens, where he had started. When he got there, he was exhausted, as a colt ridden all night by naughty night riders, and he sank down, all of a heap, by the side of a molehill, where two tiny hands were again sticking up. "Is your ladyship under the hill?" asked the little Pisky, when he could speak.
"Yes," answered the mole. "Who are you?"
"Oh, the little Pisky who lost his laugh."
"What? Haven't you found it yet?"
"No," he answered sadly, "but I'm dreadfully afraid I never shall. If I don't find it soon, I shall be taken up for a pisky vagrant, put in a bag and hung upside down like a widdy mouse in some cavern."
"Well, that will be a very tragic ending to a bright little Pisky," said the mole. "Tell me, how do you know that it will be your fate if you don't find your laugh?"
And the Pisky told her. In fact, the Lady Want was so interested about what Grenfell Night Rider had said that she begged him to tell her all his adventures from the time he set out to Rough Tor Marsh in search of his laugh till his return to Castle Gardens, which he was quite glad to do.
"You ought to find your laugh, after all your travels and what you've gone through,"
said the Lady Want, when he had related everything,
"and I hope you will."
"Does your ladyship happen to know anybody else who might have seen my laugh?" asked the little Pisky, wistfully.
"Only one."
"And who may that be?" queried the little Pisky. "Will your ladyship be kind enough to tell me?"
"The good King Arthur,"
the mole answered in a low voice. "Good King Arthur!" ejaculated the Pisky. "Why, he's dead, and a dead king's no more good than a Pisky without his laugh."
"King Arthur's not dead,"
said the mole. "Not dead?" echoed the Pisky in great surprise.
"No, he was seen perched only last evening on his own seat, which is still called King Arthur's seat, and which, as I dare say you know, overhangs the sea."
"King Arthur is not dead?" whispered the little Pisky, as if he could not get over his excitement.
"Oh, precious good thing he isn't," snapped the mole.
"But how isn't he dead?" asked the little Pisky.
"Because he was changed by magic into a bird," answered the mole. "He haunts the Dundadgel cliffs and the ruins of his old castle in the form of a chough. He was wounded almost unto death in his last great battle, it's true,"
she added, for the small man looked as if he wanted this strange happening fully explained.
"And the marks of the battle he fought and the hurts he received are yet upon him, as the legs and beak of the great black bird plainly show, as plainly as my own tiny hands, that I was once a great lady. But he is still alive. If you should see a bird with a red beak and legs flying over King Arthur's castle as day is beginning to break, you may be quite certain that he is King Arthur, and if he has seen your laugh, he will be sure to tell you. He is very kind and good, as all the world knows."
"I am glad the good King Arthur is not dead," said the little Pisky. "I'll try and keep awake till the dawn so I can ask him about my laugh, but I'm so tired." The little fellow did his best to keep awake, but he was too worn out from his run from St. Minver Sand Hills to Tintagel Castle to sit and watch for the coming of the red-legged bird, and long before the sun wheeled up behind the tors and shone upon the sea, he was sound asleep under a great mallow growing by one of the grey old walls. When he awoke, a day and a night had come and gone, and the birth of a new day was at hand. When he crawled out from under the mallow, the first thing on the island facing him was the dark form of a great black chough. He was perched on the wall above the old arched doorway, gazing gravely in front of him. The Pisky lost not a moment in getting across to the island, which he did by the Pisky passage, known only to the Piskies. And when he had caught the bird's attention, he said, "I'm the poor little Pisky who's lost his laugh. I've come to ask the good King Arthur if he's seen it." But the bird was too high up for him to make himself heard, and he had to wait patiently till it flew down. After waiting a short time, it did, and perched on a stick stuck in the ground. The Pisky ran over, and, clasping his hands, he repeated what he had just said. "How came you to know I was King Arthur?" asked the chough, ignoring the little fellow's question. "The mole who says she's the Lady Want told me," he answered. Ah, I know her. The grand lady who considered the ground on which she walked was not good enough for her dainty feet, and has now, as punishment, to walk under the ground, a lesson to all children of pride. Oh, but please, good King Arthur, answer my question about my laugh, pleaded the little Pisky, in an agony of impatience. If I don't find it soon, something dreadful will happen to me. Have patience, said the Chuff kindly. Nothing is ever won by impatience. I have seen something very funny lately running about over the grass. It is like nothing I have ever seen before, except in a Pisky's face when he laughs. It is like a laugh gone mad, and it is enough to kill a man with laughing, only to watch its antics. It made me laugh until I ached when I first noticed it. It does not make a sound, but its grimaces are worth flying 100 miles to see. Oh, it must have been my laugh you saw, cried the Pisky. My dear little lost laugh, I've travelled so far to find. Where is it now, good King Arthur? It was here not long since, answered the bird, who did not deny he was Arthur the King. Why, there it is, quite close to you, pointing with his long pointed beak to the most comical-looking thing you ever saw on the grass, a foot from where the Pisky was standing. It was a laugh gone mad, as the Chuff said. The Pisky looked behind him, and when he saw the little bit of laughing, grinning absurdity on the grass, he jumped for joy and shrieked, "It's my own little laugh that I lost!" Holding out both arms, he cried, "Oh, dear little laugh, come back to me! Oh, dear little laugh, come back!" And the droll little thing, which was a grin with a laugh and a laugh with a grin, came over to the Pisky and began to climb up his legs, grinning and doubling itself up with laughter as it climbed, till it reached his chin, where it narrowed itself into a tiny grin and vanished into the Pisky. The next moment the Pisky was shouting at the top of his voice, "I've got my laugh! I've got my laugh!" And he ran off, laughing and dancing, to the edge of the cliff and disappeared into the Pisky hole. In a few moments more he was on Castle Gardens in the great Pisky ring, laughing and dancing and dancing and laughing. His laugh was so loud and so free that his brother Piskies heard him from afar, and came running over the cliffs from Byzantine to see whatever had happened. Little Fiddler Pisky was the first to reach the gardens, and the first glance at the little whirling figure told him that his little brother had found his laugh. And putting his fiddle in position, he began fiddling away as hard as he could. As he fiddled, the other Piskies, including Grandfer Pisky, reached the ring, and the next minute they were all dancing and laughing as they had never laughed and danced before. But the one who laughed the heartiest was the little Pisky, who had lost and found his laugh. They danced for a good hour, the little fiddler in their midst, fiddling his fiddle, all the while keeping time with his head and foot, heedless that the daylight was driving the darkness away to the country to which it belongs. And King Arthur the bird flew up on the wall and watched, and the mole, who called herself the Lady Want, let her dainty hands be seen on the molehill, till the fiddling, dancing, and laughing were finished, and the Piskies went off to the Pisky beds to sleep. End of the adventures of a Pisky in search of his laugh, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16. Read by the One Who Wanders, Liverpool, May 27th, 2022. North Cornwall, Fairies and Legends. In Myth and Legends Around the World, Collection 16, from Gutenberg.org. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by the One Who Wanders. The Legend of the Padstow Doombar by Ennis Tregathan. In a faraway time, Tristram Bird of Padstow bought a gun at a little shop in the quaint old market which was in those days open to the quay, the winding river, and the St. Minver sand hills. When he had bought his gun, he began forthwith to shoot birds and other poor little creatures. After a while he grew more ambitious, and told the fair young maids of Padstow that he wanted to shoot a seal, or something more worthy of his gun. And so one bright morning he made his way down to Hawker's Cove, near the mouth of the harbour. When Tristram got there, he looked about him to see what he could shoot, and the first thing he saw was a young maid sitting all alone on a rock, combing her hair with a sea-green comb. He was so overcome at such an unexpected sight that he quite forgot what had brought him to the cove, and could do nothing but stare. The rock on which the maiden sat was covered with seaweed and surrounded by a big pool, called in that distant time the Mermaid's Glass. She was apparently unconscious that a good-looking young man was gazing at her with his bold, dark eyes, and as she combed her long and beautiful hair, she leant over the pool and looked at herself in the Mermaid's Glass. And the face it reflected in it was startling in its beauty and charm. Tristram Byrd was very tall, 6'3" in his stockings, and being such a tall young man, he could see over the maiden's head into the pool, and the face in its setting of golden hair reflected in its clear depths entirely bewitched him, and so did her graceful form, which was partly veiled in a golden raiment of her own beautiful hair. As he stood gazing at the bewitching face looking up from the Mermaid's Glass, its owner suddenly glanced over her shoulder and saw Tristram staring at her. "Good morning to you, fair maid," he said, still keeping his bold eyes fixed upon her, telling himself as he gazed that her face was even more bewitching than was its reflection. "Good morning, sir," she said. "Doing your toilet out in the open?" he said. "Yes," quoth she, wondering who the handsome young man could be and how he came to be there. "Your hair is worth combing," he said. "Is it?" she said. "It is, my dear," he said. "'Tis the colour of oats waiting for the sickle." "It is?" quoth she. "Yes, and no prettier face ever looked into Mermaid's Glass." "How do you know?" asked she. "My heart told me so," he said, coming a step or two nearer the pool, "and so did my eyes when I saw its reflection looking up from the water. It bewitched me, sweet." "Did it?" laughed she, with a tilt of her round young chin. "Yes," he said, with an answering laugh, drawing another step nearer the pool. "It does not take a man of your breed long to fall in love," said the beautiful maid, with a toss of her golden head and a curl of her sweet red lips. "Who told you that?" asked the lovesick young man, going red as a poppy. "Faces carry tales as well as little birds," quoth she. "If my face is a tale-bearer, it will tell you that I love you more than heart can say and tongue can tell," he said, drawing yet nearer the pool. "Will it?" said she, combing her golden hair with her sea-green comb. "Indeed it will and must," he said, "for I love you with all my soul, and I want you to give me a lock of your golden hair to wear over my heart." "I do not give locks of my hair to landlubbers," she cried, with another toss of her proud young head and a scornful curl of her bright red lips. "A landlubber, forsooth," he said, with an angry flash in his bold black eyes. "Who are you to speak so scornfully of a man of the land? One would think you were a maid of the sea." "I am," quoth she, twining the tresses of her hair she had combed round her shell-pink arm. "No sea maid is half as beautiful as you," said Tristram Byrd, incredulous of what the maid said. "But maid of the sea or maid of the land, I love you, sweet, and I want to have you to wife." "What must be your master, sir?" she said, with an angry flash in her sea-blue eyes. "Love is my master, sweet maid," he said. "You're my love, and you have mastered me." "Have I?" she said, with a little toss of her golden head. "Yes," said he. "Now that I've told you you're my love, and I want you to marry me, you will give me a lock of your hair, won't you, sweet?" "I cannot," she said. give me one little golden wire of your hair, if you won't give me a lock," he pleaded, coming close to the edge of the pool. "I will make a golden ring of it," he said, "and wear it in the eye of the world." "Will you?" said she. "I will, my dear," said he. "But I will not give you a hair of my head, even to make a ring with," she said. "Then give me one for a leading string," he said, "if you will be my charmer. You shall take the end of it and lead me whithersoever you will." "Even to the whipping post?" said she. "Yes, even at the whipping post," he said. "So you'll be my fair bride, won't you, sweet? If you'll consent to love me, I'll make you as happy as the day is long." "Will you?" she cried, with a warning look in her sea-blue eyes and a strange little laugh. "Yes," he said, thinking her answer meant consent. "I've got a dear little house at Higher St. Saviour's, overlooking the river and Padstow town low in the valley." "Have you?" she said. "I have," he said. "And the little house is full of handsome things, a chest full of linens in which my mother wove for me on her loom, against the time I should be wed to a pretty maid like you, an oaken dresser with every shelf full of clome, and a cosy settle where we can sit hand in hand, talking of our love. You'll marry me soon, won't you, sweet? The little house, and all that's in it, is waiting for my charmer." "Is it?" cried the beautiful maid, taking up another tress of her golden hair and slowly combing its silken length with her sea-green comb. "But let me tell you once and forever, I would not marry you if you were decked in diamonds and your house a golden house, and everything in it made of jewels and set in gold." "Wouldn't you?" cried Tristan Bird, in great amazement. "I wouldn't," said she. "You're a strange young maid, to refuse an upstanding young man like me," he said, "who's a house of his own, to say nothing of what's inside it. Why, dozens of fair young maidens show up to Padstow, would have me to-morrow, if I were only to ax them." "Then ax them," cried the beautiful maid, turning her proud young head and looking out towards Pentire, gorgeous in its spring colouring. "But I can't ask any of them to marry me when I love you," cried the infatuated youth. "You've bewitched me, sweet, and no other man shall have you. If I can't have you living, I'll have you dead. I'll come back down to Horker's Cove to shoot something to startle the natives of Padstow town, and they will be startled, sure enough, if I shoot a beautiful young little vixen like you, and take home to them." "Shoot me, if you will, but marry you I will not," said the beautiful maiden, with a scornful laugh. "But I give you fair warning that if you shoot me as you say you will rue the day that you did your wicked deed. I will curse you in this beautiful haven, which has ever been a refuge for ships from the time that ships sailed upon the seas." And her sea-blue eyes looked up and down the estuary from the headlands that guarded its mouth to the furthest point off the blue winding river. "I will shoot you in spite of the curse if you won't consent to be mine," cried the bewitched young man. "I will never consent," she said. "Then I will shoot you now," he said, and Tristan Bird lifted his gun and fired, and the ball entered the poor young maiden's soft pink side. She put her hand to her side to cover the gaping wound the shot had made, and as she did so, she pulled herself out of the water, and where the feet should have been was the glittering tail of a fish. "I've shot a poor young mermaid," Tristram cried, "and woe is me!" And he shivered, like when someone is passing over his grave. "Yes, you've shot a poor mermaid," said the Maid of the Sea. "I am dying, and with my dying breath I curse this safe harbour, which was large enough to hold all the fighting ships of the Spanish Armada and your own, and it shall be cursed with a bar of sand which shall be a bar of doom, and many a stately ship, and many a noble life, and it shall stretch from the Mermaid's Glass to Trebetherick Bay on the opposite shore, and prevent this haven of deep water from ever again becoming a floating harbour, save at full tide. The Mermaid's wrath will haunt the bar of doom her dying curse shall bring, until your wicked deed has been fully avenged." And looking round the great bay of shining waters, laughing and rippling in the eye of the sun, she raised her arms and cursed the harbour of Padstow with a bitter curse. And Tristram shuddered as he listened, and as she cursed, she uttered a wailing cry and fell back dead into the pool, and the water where she sank was dyed with her blood. "I've committed a wicked deed," said Tristram Byrd, gazing into the blood-stained pool, "and verily I shall be punished for my sin." And he turned away with the fear of coming doom in his heart. As he went up the cove and along the top of the cliffs, the distressful wailing cry of the mermaid seemed to follow him, and the sky gloomed all around as he went, and the sea moaned a dreadful moan as it came up the bay. When he reached Tregills, overlooking the cove, he stood by the gate for a minute and gazed out over the beautiful harbour. The sea, which was only half an hour ago as blue as the eyes of the sea maid he had shot, and full of smiles and laughter, was now black as ash buds, save where a golden streak lay across the water from Hawker's Cove to Drobethwick Bay. "Oh, the maid's curse is already working," moaned Tristram Byrd as he fled through the lane leading to Padstow, as if a death-hound were after him. When he reached Palace House, he met a little crowd of Padstow maids going out flower-gathering. "Whither away so fast, Tristram Byrd?" asked a little maid. "You aren't driving a team of snails this time, 'tis plain to see. Where hast thou been?" "Need you ask?" said a pert young girl. "He's been away shooting something to startle the maids of Padstow with. What strange new creature do you shoot, Tristram Byrd?" "Oh, a wonderful creature with eyes like blue fire," returned the unhappy youth, looking away over St. Minver Dunes towards the tors. "A sweet, soft creature with beautiful hair, every wire of which was a sunbeam of gold, and her face was the loveliest I ever beheld. It clean bewitched me." "A beautiful maid like that? And yet you shot her?" cried all the young maids of Padstow town. "Yes, I shot her, to my undoing and the undoing of our fair haven," groaned Tristram Byrd, and he told them all about it, where he had seen the beautiful mermaid, of his bewitchment from the moment he saw her face of haunting charm looking up at him from the mermaid's glass, and of the curse she uttered ere she fell back dead into the pool. All the smiles went out of the bright faces of the Padstow maids as he told his tale. "What a pity, Tristram Byrd, that you should have been so foolish as to shoot a mermaid," they said. And they did not go and pick flowers as they had intended, but went back to their homes instead, and Tristram Byrd went on to Hyacinth Saviour's, where he lived in a little house overlooking Padstow town, nestling like a bird in its nest. A fearful gale blew on the night of the day Tristram Byrd shot the mermaid, and all the next day too, and the next night, and through the awful howling of the gale was heard the bellowing of the wind-tormented sea. Such a terrible storm had never been known at Padstow town within the memory of man, so the old Ganfer men said, and never a gale lasted so long. When the wind went down, the natives of Padstow ventured out to see what the gale had wrought, and sad was the havoc it had made. And some went out to Chapel Stile, where a small chapel stood overlooking the haven. And what should meet their horrified gaze but a terrible bar of sand, which the mermaid's curse had brought there. And it stretched from Hawker's Cove to the opposite shore, and what was worse, the great sandbar was covered with wrecks of ships and bodies of drowned men. "'Tis the bar of doom, brought there by the fearful curse of the maid of the sea, whom I shot with my brand new gun," cried Tristram Byrd, who was one of the first to reach the stile when the wind was gone down. And he told them all, as he had told the Padstow maids, of what the mermaid had said before and after he had shot her. "Oh, because of the wicked deed I did," he said, "I've brought a curse of my native town, and Padstow will never be blessed with a safe and beautiful harbour till the poor mermaid's death be avenged." There was a dreadful silence after Tristram Byrd had spoken, and the men and women of Padstow town gazed at each other, troubled and sad, knowing that what the youth, who had been bewitched by the mermaid's face, had said was true. For there below them was the great bar of sand dividing the outer harbour from the inner, and on it lay the masts and spars of broken ships and lifeless bodies of the drowned. The wind was quiet, but the sea was still breaking and roaring on the back of the Doom Bar. And as the waves thundered and broke, a wailing cry sounded forth like the wail that Tristram heard when the mermaid disappeared under the water. It sounded like the distressful cry of a woman bewailing her dead, and all who heard shivered and shook. And both old and young looked down on the Doom Bar with dread in their eyes, but they saw nothing but the dead bodies of the sailors and their broken ships. "Bah, it's a mermaid's wrath," cried an old Gantherman, leaning against the grey walls of the ancient chapel. "And she's wailing the wail of the drowned, and mark my words, everyone," letting his eyes wander from one face to another, "each time a ship is caught on this dreadful bar and lives are lost, and lost they will be. The mermaid's wrath will bewail the drowned." And it came to pass, as the old man said. And whenever vessels are wrecked on that fateful bar of sand, lying across the mouth of Padstow harbour, and men are drowned, it is told that the mermaid's distressful cry is still heard bewailing the poor, dead sailors. End of the legend of the Padstow Doom Bar in Myths and Legends Around the World. Collection 16. Read by the One Who Wanders. Liverpool, May 29th, 2022.
The Petition to the King in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16. From Told on the Pagoda, Tales of Burma. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ahana Malik. The Petition to the King by Mabel Cosgrove. In the reign of King Mindun, who was the father of King Thibaw, a servant sent a petition to him in which he set forth that he had been his humble and faithful servitor before his accession to the throne. But now, although 7 long years had gone by since then, he had remained forgotten and unnoticed. Continuing in this strain for a space, he ended with the following parable. In the Zeta country there lived a king who had a son named Padoma, whom he sent to Thakada to be educated, and with him he sent a young attendant called Thomana. For 3 years they stayed at Thakada, at the end of which period the prince, having completed his studies, prepared to return home. On their way, travelling by easy stages, they paused at a small village situated in deep wooded lands where a great feast was being held. Hundreds of people had gathered there from all parts. A large tent was erected in one part, where a banquet was spread, to partake of which they humbly begged the prince. And he willingly accepted. On the ground had been spread matting, on a part of which a gorgeously embroidered scarlet cloth with a golden fringe was put out for the prince, and a white one, less magnificently worked and with a silver fringe, for his friend and attendant Thomana. When they had seated themselves, the rest of the company did likewise, remaining, however, at a distance and separated by a cord. Now Thomana was very learned in astrology, having read and thought deeply on that subject, and he knew as soon as he saw the prince seat himself on the red cloth that he would become king upon that very day. It was a brilliant assembly, every one clad in delicate silks of all hues and glittering with jewels. The feast lasted long, it seemed, indeed, as if the constant succession of dishes was to be an endless one. all were in the best of spirits and laughed and talked greatly. When the prince had finished his repast, he was shown into an inner tent where a couch of the same royal color had been placed, and in front was a slightly raised platform of bamboo draped with violet and rose-pink satin, richly worked and lighted with lamps that shed a subdued radiance round and about the little graceful figures of several dancing girls who had been bidden to dance for His Royal Highness. Their dresses were so formed as to represent armor, and on their heads were similar coverings. They performed peculiar dreamy kind of movements amidst a mist of varying hues. The prince was much interested and postponed retiring until late. Thomana, having bidden his royal master good night, felt disinclined for sleep. So strolling into a park like Dimesne that was adjacent, he seated himself under a large tree whose branches spread for a considerable way and became lost in thought. It was a glorious night, with not a sound in the air save the soft whir of some purple-eyed or golden-winged insect as it floated by in the darkness. As he sat there musing on the events of the evening and the future of the prince, 2 large leaves fell from above into his hand. One was old and withered, the other was fresh and green. "Ah," he murmured as he looked at them. "In the same way as an old and a young leaf drops from the tree, so may a man full of years and one who is in the morning of life die at the same time." In the midst of his meditations, which lasted long, he became a Rahan and was taken from the garden to the Gandremadana mountains. At the same time, a chariot of pearl, drawn by 4 pure white horses with trappings of gold, was on its way to the prince to carry him back, as his father had died that day. Following the chariot came 4 ministers and a train of court officials accompanied by soldiers. They awakened the sleeping prince and acquainted him with their news. Then, when he was prepared, he stepped into the chariot that was waiting and was borne with all speed to the palace, where he was proclaimed king the following day with the utmost pomp, ceremony, and rejoicings. In his new life and amidst his many duties and responsibilities, he entirely forgot the existence of his attendant, who had been his constant companion for 3 years. Therefore, his absence passed unrecorded and unnoticed. And for what the king forgets, the courtiers must never be unwise enough to remember. At the end of 30 years, when the king was getting old, he remembered Thomana and wondered greatly where he might be. Whereupon he immediately caused it to be made known throughout his dominions that he would give 1,00,000 rupees to anyone who should give him any news of his lost servant. Now Thomana, owing to his great piety and powers of clairvoyance, became aware immediately of the fact that his old master had recollected him and desired his presence. Therefore he went at once to the garden where he had been seated before he attained his Rahanship so many years before. Close by the tree under whose branches he had sat were 4 shepherd boys, their flocks grazing near, while they themselves talked together of the big reward that the king had offered for news of his old servant. Thomana, coming through the leafy aisles, heard them and accosted them, declaring that he was the person whom the king desired. They rose and glanced at him doubtingly. "Let 2 of you," he said, "go to the palace and tell his majesty that I await him here," to which they assented. A short while passed, and then an immense carriage, glittering like gold and silver in the sun, and followed by others less imposing, could be seen coming rapidly along the white winding road. Pulling up at the entrance, the king himself alighted and came through the gates that were all brazen and blazoned straight towards Thomana, his arms outstretched to embrace him. But he whom he would have greeted so cordially stopped him, saying, I am now a Rahan, with men, their feelings, their passions, their brief triumphs and sorrows, likes and dislikes, I have no affinity. Then he folded his arms and stood in silence. His face was very cold and still. The king, looking at him, saw that he was poorly clad and bent and thin, and pressed him to return to the court, where he promised him money and many wives. But the Rahan answered, I do not need wealth, nor any of the poor fleeting pleasures that this world can offer. Let your majesty come with me instead and visit my abode of rest. What is it like, this place? Inquired the king in wonder, that it can render its inhabitants indifferent to what we esteem the most desirable of all things in this life. It is situated far from here, replied Thomana, and the approach to it is a broad, long avenue of gorgeous blossoms, such as you have never dreamed of, that bloom forever with a perfume that is at once dreamy, drowsy, and infinitely sweet. Vast sprays of water spring from the mouths of silver dragons. Overhead the branches of trees interlace, showing but a strip of blue sky through their quivering leaves. For hours you can wander amongst these mazes of roses, this wonder of color and beauty. At the end of the grove is situated an immense tree, larger than aught that you have seen and higher than any eye could reach. It is surrounded by columns of marble that glow like jewels. Here the gnats and fairies dwell, with nothing to disturb their seclusion and solitude save the sound of falling waters and the song of birds. While over all is cast such a spell as this life does not hold. Ah, beside the perfection of that world, how poor and valueless are the things of this. There one talks with the gods and dwells in worlds beyond the sun. There is no room for regrets or for desires. There everyone is beautiful, therefore we do not covet beauty. There wealth is common to all, therefore we do not desire it. There all are equal, and love and goodness are the aim and end of all things. Come and see for yourself, he added. And the king, marveling greatly at what he had heard, went. And there, in the midst of those divine surroundings, with naught to disturb the mind from the good, he wandered, awed and silent, but not afraid. In those cool, wide halls of bliss, all memories of grosser things and ways faded into nothingness. He forgot his kingdom and was by it forgot. End of The Petition to the King in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16.
The Coming of the Tua de Danann in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16 from the Gutenberg Project. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by N. Patel IV. The Coming of the Tua de Danann by Lady I. A. Gregory. It was in a mist, the Tua de Danann, the people of the gods of Danu, or as some called them, the men of Dea, came through the air and the high air to Ireland. It was from the north that they came, and in the place they came from they had 4 cities, where they fought their battle for learning. Great Phalias, and shining Gorias, and Phineas, and rich Murias that lay to the south. And in those cities they had 4 wise men to teach their young men skill and knowledge and perfect wisdom. Senias and Murias, and Arias the fair-haired poet in Phineas, and Urias of noble nature in Gorias, and Morias in Phalias itself. And they brought from those 4 cities their 4 treasures, a stone of virtue from Phalias, that was called the Leaphail, the stone of destiny. And from Gorias they brought a sword, and from Phineas a spear of victory, and from Morias the 4th treasure, the cauldron that no company ever went away from unsatisfied. It was Nuada was king of the Tuatha De Danann at the time, but Mananan, the son of Leir, was greater again. And of the others that were chief among them were Ogma, brother to the king, that taught them writing, and Diankect, that understood healing, and Night, a god of battle, and Credenus the craftsman, and Goibniu the smith. And the greatest among their women were Badab, a battle goddess, and Macha, whose mast feeding was the heads of men killed in battle, and the Morrigu, the crow of battle, and the Ayer, and the Fodla, and the Banba, daughters of the Dagda, that all 3 gave their names to Ireland afterwards, and the Eaden, the nurse of poets, and Brigit. That was a woman of poetry, and the poets worshipped her, for her sway was very great and very noble. And she was a woman of healing along with that, and a woman of smith's work. And it was she first made the whistle for calling one to another through the night. And the one side of her face was ugly, but the other side was very comely. And the meaning of her name was Breosaihin, a fiery arrow. And among the other women there were many shadow forms and great queens, but Dana, that was called the Mother of Gods, was beyond them all. And the 3 things they put above all others were the plough, and the sun, and the hazel tree, so that it was said in the time to come that Ireland was divided between those 3, Cole the hazel, and Kecht the plough, and Grian the sun. And they had a well below the sea where the 9 hazels of wisdom were growing, that is, the hazels of inspiration and of the knowledge of poetry. And their leaves and their blossoms would break out in the same hour, and would fall on the well in a shower that raised a purple wave. And then the 5 salmon that were waiting there would eat the nuts, and their color would come out in the red spots of their skin. And any person that would eat one of these salmon would know all wisdom and all poetry. And there were 7 streams of wisdom that sprang from that well, and turned back to it again. And the people of many arts have all drank from that well. It was on the 1st day of Beltane, that is called now May Day, the Tuatha De Danann came, and it was to the northwest of Connacht. They landed. But the Firbolgs, the men of the bag, that were in Ireland before them, and that had come from the south, saw nothing but a mist, and it lying on the hills. Eochaid, the son of Urk, was king of the Firebolgs at the time, and messengers came to him at Timher, and told him that there was a new race of people come into Ireland, but whether from the earth or from the skies or on the wind it was not known, and that they had settled themselves at Maughrain. They thought there would be wonder on Eochaid when he heard the news, but there was no wonder on him, for a dream had come to him in the night, and when he asked his droids the meaning of the dream, it is what they said, that it would not be long till there would be a strong enemy coming against him. Then King Eochaid took counsel with his chief advisers, and it is what they agreed, to send a good champion of their own to see the strangers and to speak with them. So they chose out Sreng. That was a great fighting man, and he rose up and took his strong red-brown shield, and his 2 thick-handled spears, and his sword, and his head covering, and his thick iron club, and he set out from Timher, and went towards the place where the strangers were, at Maughrain. But before he reached it, the watchers of the Tuatha De Danann got a sight of him, and they sent out one of their own champions, Braise, with his shield and his sword and his 2 spears, to meet him and to talk with him. So the two champions went one towards the other slowly, and keeping a good watch on each other, and wondering at one another's arms, till they came near enough for talking, and then they stopped, and each put his shield before his body, and struck it hard into the ground, and they looked at one another over the rim. Braise was the first to speak, and when Strang heard it was Irish he was talking, his own tongue, he was less uneasy, and they drew nearer, and asked questions as to one another's family and race. And after a while they put away their shields, and it was what Strang said, that he had raised in his dread of the thin, sharp spears Braise had in his hand, and Bread said he himself was in dread of the thick-handled spears he saw with Strang, and he asked were all the arms of the Firbolgs of the same sort, and Strang took off the tyings of the spears to show them better, and Braise wondered at them, being so strong and so heavy, and so sharp at the sides, though they had no points. And Strang told him the name of the spears was Crossack, and that they would break through shields and crush flesh and bones, so that their thrust was death or wounds that never healed. And then he looked at the sharp, thin, hard-pointed spears that were with Braise, and in the end they made an exchange of spears, the way the fighters on each side would see the weapons the others were used to. And it is the message Braise sent to the Firbolgs, that if they would give up one half of Ireland, his people would be content to take it in peace. But if they would not give up that much, there should be a battle. And he and Strang said to one another that whatever might happen in the future, they themselves would be friends. Strang went back to Tímhir and gave the message and showed the spear. And it is what he advised his people, to share the country, and not go into battle with people that had weapons so much better than their own. But Eochaid and his chief men consulted together, and they said in the end, "We will not give up half of the country to these strangers, for if we do, they will soon take the whole." Now, as to the men of Dea, when Braise went back to them, he showed them the heavy spear, and told them of the strong, fierce man he had got it from, and how sturdy he was, and well armed. They thought it likely there would soon be a battle, and they went back from where they were to a better place, further west in Connacht. And there they set themselves and made walls and ditches on the plain of Machnia, where they had the great mountain Balgata in their rear. And while they were moving there and putting up their walls, 3 queens of them, Bottom, Macha, and the Morrigu, went to Tímhir where the Firbolgs were making their plans. And by the power of their enchantments they brought mists and clouds of darkness over the whole place, and they sent showers of fire and blood over the people, and the way they could not see or speak with one another through the length of 3 days. But at the end of that time, the Druids of Firbolgs, Cesarn and Ignathach, broke the enchantment. The Firbolgs gathered their men together then, and they came with their 11 battalions and took their stand at the eastern end of the plain of Magnia. And Nuada, the king of the men of Dea, sent his poets to make the same offer he made before, to be content with half of the country if it was given to him. King Eochaid bade the poets to ask an answer of his chief men that were gathered there, and when they heard the offer they would not consent. So the messengers asked them when they would begin battle. "We must have a delay," they said, "for we want time to put our spears and our armor in order, and to brighten our helmets, and to sharpen our swords, and to have spears made like the ones you have. And as to yourselves," they said, "you will be wanting to have spears like our Crasacks have made for you." So they agreed then to make a delay of a quarter of a year for preparation. It was on a midsummer day. They began the battle. 3 times 9 hurlers of the Tuatha De Danann went out against 3 times 9 hurlers of the Firbolgs, and they were beaten, and every one of them was killed. And the king Eochaid sent a messenger to ask would they have a battle every day or every second day, and it is what Nuada answered, that they would have it every day, but there should be just the same number of men fighting on each side. Eochaid agreed to that, but he was not well pleased, for there were more men of the Firbolgs than that of the men of Dia. So the battle went on for 4 days, and there were great feats done on each side, and a great many champions come to their death. But for those that were alive at the evening, the physicians on each side used to make a bath of healing with every sort of healing plant or herb in it, the way that they would be strong and sound for the next day's fight. And on the 4th day the men of Dea got the upper hand, and the Firbolgs were driven back, and a great thirst came upon Eochaid, their king, in battle, and he went off the field looking for a drink, and 350 of his men protecting him. But 350 of the Tuatha De Danann followed after them till they came to a strand that is called Traig Eothal, and they had a fierce fight there. And at the last King Eochaid fell, and they buried him there, and they raised a great heap of stones over his grave. And when there were but 300 men left of the 11 battalions of the Firbolgs, and Strang at the head of them, Nuada offered them peace, and their choice among the 5 provinces of Ireland. And Strang said they would take Connacht, and he and his people lived there, and their children after him. It is of them Ferdiad came afterwards that made such a good fight against Cuchulainn, and Irk, son of Cairbre, that gave him his death. And that battle, that was the first fought in Ireland by the men of Dea, was called by some the first battle of Mag Tuirida. And the Tuatha De Danann took possession of Tímhair, that was sometimes called Druim Cain, the beautiful ridge, and Liathradrum, the grey ridge, and Druim na Descan, the ridge of outlook. All those names were given to Tímhair, and from that time it was above all other places, for its king was the high king over all Ireland. The king's rath lay to the north, and the hill of hostages to the northeast of the high seat, and the green of Tímhair to the west of the hill of the hostages. And to the northeast, in the hill of Site, was a well called Nemnach, and out of it flowed a stream called Nith, and on that stream was the first mill was built in Ireland. And to the north of the hill of hostages was the stone, the Liathile, and it used to roar under the feet of every king that would take possession of Ireland. And the wall of the 3 whispers was near the house of the women that had 7 doors to the east and 7 doors to the west. And it is in the house that the feasts of Tímhair used to be held. And there was the great house of 1,000 soldiers, and near it to the south the little hill of the women soldiers. Chapter 2. The Reign of Braise. But if Nauda won the battle, he lost his own arm in it, that was struck off by Strang, and by that loss there came troubles and vexation on his people, for it was a law with the Tuatha De Danann that no man that was not in perfect shape should be king, and after Nauda had lost the battle, he was put out of kingship on that account. And the king they chose in his place was Braise. That was the most beautiful of all their young men, so that if a person wanted to praise any beautiful thing, whether it was a plane or a dun or an ale or a flame or a woman or a man or a horse, it is what he would say, it is as beautiful as Braise. And he was the son of a woman of the Tuatha De Danann, but who his father was no one knew but herself. But in spite of Braise being so beautiful, his reign brought no great good luck to his people, for the Fomor, whose dwelling place was beyond the sea, or as some say, below the sea westward, began putting tribute on them, the way they would get them under their own rule. It was a long time before that the Fomor came first to Ireland. Dreadful they were to look at, and maimed, having but 1 foot or 1 hand, and they under the leadership of a giant and his mother. There never came to Ireland an army more horrible or more dreadful than that army of the Fomor, and they were friendly with the Firbolgs, and content to leave Ireland to them, but there was jealousy between them and the men of Dea, And it was a hard tax they put on them, 1/3 part of the corn they asked, and 1/3 part of their milk, and 1/3 part of their children, so that there was not smoke rising from a roof in Ireland, but was under tribute to them. And Breze made no stand against them, but let them get their way. And as to Breze himself, he put a tax on every house in Ireland of the milk of hornless dun cows, or of the milk of cows of some other single colour, enough for 100 men. And one time, to deceive him, Necton singed all the cows of Ireland in a fire of fern, and then he smeared them with the ashes of flaxseed, the way they were all dark brown. He did that by the advice of the Druid Findgol, son of Findamas. And another time they made 300 cows of wood with dark brown pails in place of udders, and the pails were filled with black bog stuff. Then Breze came to look at the cows, and to see them milked before him, and Cian, father of Lug, was there. And when they were milked, it was the bog stuff that was squeezed out, and Breze took a drink of it, thinking it to be milk, and he was not the better for it for a long time. And there was another thing against Breze. He was no way open-handed, and the chief men of the Tua de Danann grumbled against him, for their knives were never greased in his house, and however often they might visit him, there was no smell of ale on their breath, and there was no sort of pleasure or merriment in his house, and no call for poets, or singers, or harpers, or pipers, or horn-blowers, or jugglers, or fools. And as to the trials of strength they were used to see between their champions, the only use their strength was put to now was doing work for the king. Ogma himself, the shining poet, was under orders to bring firing to the palace every day for a whole army from the island of Maud. And he so weak for want of food that the sea would sweep away 2/3 of his bundle every day. And as to the Dagda, he was put to build raths, for he was a good builder, and he made a trench around the rathburies. And he used often to be tired at the work, and one time he nearly gave in altogether for want of food, and this is the way that happened. He used to meet in the house an idle blind man, Crindenbau his name was, that had a sharp tongue, and that coveted the Dagda's share of food, for he thought his own to be small beside it. So he said to him, "For the sake of your good name, let the 3 best bits of your share be given to me." And the Dagda gave in every night, but he was the worse for it, for what the blind man called a bit would be the size of a good pig, and with his 3 bits he would take a full 1/3 of the whole. But one day, as the Dagda was in the trench, he saw his son, Angus Og, coming to him. "That is a good meeting," said Angus, "but what is on you? For you have no good appearance today." "There is a reason for that," said Dagda, "for every evening Crindenbau, the blind man, makes a demand for the 3 best bits of my share of food, and takes them from me." "I will give you an advice," said Angus. He put his hand in his bag then, and took out 3 pieces of gold, and gave them to him. "Put these pieces of gold into the 3 bits you will give this evening to Crindenbau," he said, "and they will be the best bits in the dish, and the gold will turn within him the way he will die." So in the evening Dagda did that, and no sooner had Crindenbau swallowed down the gold than he died. Some of the people said then to the king, "The Dagda has killed Crindenbau, giving him some deadly herb." The king believed that, and there was anger on him against the Dagda, and he gave orders that he should be put to death. But the Dagda said, "You are not giving the right judgment of a prince." And he told all that had happened, and how Crindenbau used to say, "Give me the 3 best bits before you, for my own share is not good tonight." And on this night, he said, the 3 pieces of gold were the best things before me, and I gave them to him, and he died. The king gave orders then to have the body cut open, and they found gold inside it, and they knew it was the truth the Dagda had told. And Angus came to him the next day, and he said, "Your work will soon be done, and when you are given your wages, take nothing they may offer you till the cattle of Ireland are brought before you, and choose out a heifer, then black and black-maned, that I will tell you the signs of." So when the Dagda had brought his work to an end, and they asked him what reward he wanted, he did as Angus had bidded him, and that seemed folly to Braze. He thought the Dagda would have asked more than a heifer of him. There came a day at last when a poet came to look for hospitality in the king's house. Corpre, son of Atane, poet of the Tua de Danann, and it is how he was treated. He was put in a little dark, narrow house where there was no fire, no furniture or bed, and for a feast 3 small cakes, and they dry, were brought to him on a little dish. When he rose up in the morrow, he was no way thankful, and as he was going across the green, it is what he said: "Without food ready on a dish, without milk enough for a calf to grow on, without shelter, without light in the darkness of night, without enough to pay a storyteller, may that be the prosperity of Braze." And from that day there was no good luck with Braze. But it is going down he was forever after, and that was the first satire ever made in Ireland. Now as to Nauda. After his arm being struck off, he was in sickness for a while. And then Diancecht, the healer, made an arm of silver for him, with movement in every finger of it, and put it on him. And from that he was called Nauda Argat Lam, of the silver hand, forever after. Now Miach, son of Diancecht, was a better hand at healing than his father, and had done many things. He met a young man, having but one eye, at Teamhair one time, and the young man said, "If you are a good physician, you will put an eye in the place of the eye I lost." "I could put the eye of that cat in your lap in its place," said Miach. "I would like that well," said the young man. So Miach put the cat's eye in his head, but he would as soon have been without it after, for when he wanted to sleep and take his rest, it is then the eye would start at the squeaking of the mice, or the flight of the birds, or the movement of the rushes, and when he was wanting to watch an army or a gathering, it is then it was sure to be in a deep sleep. And Miach was not satisfied with what his father had done to the king, and he took Nauda's own hand that had been struck off, brought it to him, and set it in his place, and said, "Joint to joint, sinew to sinew." 3 days and 3 nights he was with the king. The first day he put the hand against his side, and the second day against his breast till it was covered with skin, and the third day he put bulrushes that were blackened in the fire on it, and at the end of that time the king was healed. But Diancecht was vexed when he saw his son doing a better cure than himself, and he threw his sword at his head, that it cut the flesh, but the lad healed the wound by the means of his skill. Then Diancecht threw it a second time, that it reached the bone, but the lad was able to cure the wound. Then he struck him the 3rd time and the 4th, till he cut out the brain, for he knew no physician could cure him after that blow. And Miach died, and he buried him. And the herbs grew up from his grave, to the number of his joints and sinews 365. And Eramid, his sister, came and spread out her cloak, and laid out the herbs in it according to their virtue. But Diancecht saw her doing that, and he came and mixed up the herbs, so that no one knows all their right powers to this day. Then, when the Tua de Danann saw Nauda as well as he was before, they gathered together to Teamhair, where Braze was, and they bade him give up the kingship, for he had held it long enough. So he had to give it up, though he was not very willing, and Nauda was put back in the kingship again. There was great vexation on Braze then, and he searched his mind to know how he could be avenged on those that had put him out, and how he could gather an army against them. And he went to his mother, Eri, daughter of Delbaith, and bade her tell him what his race was. "I know that well," she said. She told him that his father was a king of Fomor, Elathan, son of Dalbaich, and that he came to her one time over a level sea in some great vessel that seemed to be of silver, but she could not see its shape. And he himself, having the appearance of a young man with yellow hair, and his clothes sewed with gold, and 5 rings of gold around his neck. And she had refused the love of all the young men of her own people, gave him her love, and she cried when he left her. And he gave her a ring from his hand, and bade her give it only to the man whose finger would fit, and he went away the same way he had come. And she brought out the ring then to Breze, and he put it around his middle finger, and it fitted him well. And they went together to the hill, where she was at the time she saw the silver vessel coming, and down to the strand, and she and Breze and his people set out for the country of Fulmore. And when they came to that country, they found a great plain with many gatherings of people on it. And they went to the gathering that looked best, and the people asked where did they come from, and they said they were come from Ireland. Have you hounds with you? They asked them then, for it was custom at that time when strangers came to a gathering to give them some friendly challenge. We have hounds, said Breze. So the hounds were matched against one another, and the hounds of Tuatha De Danann were better than the hounds of the Fulmore. Have you horses for a race? They asked then. We have, said Breze, and the horses of the Tuatha De Danann beat the horses of the Fulmore. When they asked, was any one among them a good hand at the sword, they said Breze was the best. But when he put his hand into the sword, Elathan, his father, that he knew was among them, knew the ring, and he asked, who is this young man? Then his mother answered him and told the whole story, and that Breze was his own son. There was sorrow on his father then, and he said, what was it that drove you out of the country you were king over? And Breze said, nothing drove me out but my own injustice and my own hardness. I took away their treasures from the people, and their jewels, and their food itself, and there were never taxes put upon them before I was king. That is bad, said his father. It is of our prosperity you had a right to think more than of your own kingship, and their goodwill would be better than their curses, he said. And what is it that you are come to look here for? I am come to look for fighting men, said Breze, that I may take Ireland by force. You have no right to get it by injustice when you could not keep it by injustice, said his father. What advice do you have for me then? Said Breze. And Elathan bade him go to the chief king of the Fulmore, Bailor of Evil Eye, to see what advice and what help he would give him. End of the coming of the Tuatha De Danann in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16.
The Flood in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16. From Old Greek Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ahana Malik. The Flood by James Baldwin. In those very early times, there was a man named Deucalion, and he was the son of Prometheus. He was only a common man and not a titan like his great father, and yet he was known far and wide for his good deeds and the uprightness of his life. His wife's name was Pyrrha, and she was one of the fairest of the daughters of men. After Jupiter had bound Prometheus on Mount Caucasus and had sent diseases and cares into the world, men became very, very wicked. They no longer built houses and tended their flocks and lived together in peace, but every man was at war with his neighbor, and there was no law nor safety in all the land. Things were in much worse case now than they had been before Prometheus had come among men. And that was just what Jupiter wanted. But as the world became wickeder and wickeder every day, he began to grow weary of seeing so much bloodshed and of hearing the cries of the oppressed and the poor. These men, he said to his mighty company, are nothing but a source of trouble. When they were good and happy, we felt afraid lest they should become greater than ourselves. And now they are so terribly wicked that we are in worse danger than before. There is only one thing to be done with them, and that is to destroy them, every one. So he sent a great rainstorm upon the earth, and it rained day and night for a long time, and the sea was filled to the brim, and the water ran over the land and covered first the plains, and then the forests, and then the hills. But men kept on fighting and robbing, even while the rain was pouring down and the sea was coming up over the land. No one but Deucalion, the son of Prometheus, was ready for such a storm. He had never joined in any of the wrongdoings of those around him, and had often told them that unless they left off their evil ways, there would be a day of reckoning in the end. Once every year he had gone to the land of the Caucasus to talk with his father, who was hanging chained to the mountain peak. "The day is coming," said Prometheus, "when Jupiter will send a flood to destroy mankind from the earth. Be sure that you are ready for it, my son." And so, when the rain began to fall, Deucalion drew from its shelter a boat which he had built for just such a time. He called fair Pyrrha, his wife, and the two sat in the boat and were floated safely on the rising waters. Day and night, I cannot tell how long, the boat drifted hither and thither. The tops of the trees were hidden by the flood, and then the hills, and then the mountains, and Deucalion and Pyrrha could see nothing anywhere but water, 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 and they knew that all the people in the land had been drowned. After a while, the rain stopped falling, and the clouds cleared away, and the blue sky and the golden sun came out overhead. Then the water began to sink very fast and to run off the land towards the sea, and early the very next day the boat was drifted high upon a mountain called Parnassus, and Deucalion and Pyrrha stepped out upon the dry land. After that, it was only a short time until the whole country was laid bare, and the trees shook their leafy branches in the wind, and the fields were carpeted with grass and flowers more beautiful than in the days before the flood. But Deucalion and Pyrrha were very sad, for they knew that they were the only persons who were left alive in all the land. At last they started to walk down the mountainside towards the plain, wondering what would become of them now, all alone as they were in the wide world. While they were talking and trying to think of what they could do, they heard a voice behind them. They turned and saw a noble young prince standing on one of the rocks above them. He was very tall, with blue eyes and yellow hair. There were wings on his shoes and on his cap, and in his hands he bore a staff with golden serpents twined around it. They knew at once that he was Mercury, the swift messenger of the mighty ones, and they waited to hear what he would say. "Is there anything that you wish?" he asked. "Tell me, and you shall have whatever you desire." "We should like, above all things," said Deucalion, "to see this land full of people once more. For without neighbors and friends, the world is a very lonely place indeed." "Go on down the mountain," said Mercury, "and as you go, cast the bones of your mother over your shoulders behind you." And with these words he leaped into the air and was seen no more. "What did he mean?" asked Pyrrha. "Surely I do not know," said Deucalion. "But let us think a moment. Who is our mother, if it is not the earth, from whom all living things have sprung? And yet, what could he mean by the bones of our mother?" "Perhaps he meant the stones of the earth," said Pyrrha. "Let us go on down the mountain, and as we go, let us pick up the stones in our path and throw them over our shoulders behind us." "It is rather a silly thing to do," said Deucalion, "and yet there can be no harm in it, and we shall see what will happen." And so they walked on, down the steep slope of Mount Parnassus. And as they walked, they picked up the loose stones in their way and cast them over their shoulders. And strange to say, the stones which Deucalion threw sprung up as full-grown men, strong and handsome and brave. And the stones which Pyrrha threw sprang up as full-grown women, lovely and fair. When at last they reached the plain, they found themselves at the head of a noble company of human beings, all eager to serve them. So Deucalion became their king, and he set them in homes and taught them how to till the ground and how to do many useful things. And the land was filled with people who were happier and far better than those who had dwelt there before the flood. And they named the country Hellas, after Helen, the son of Deucalion and Pyrrha. And the people are to this day called Hellenists. But we call the country Greece. End of The Flood in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16.
Concerning the human sacrifices that took place on the death of Chief Induma in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16, from Ikem Folk Stories from Southern Nigeria. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jerome Ware. Concerning the human sacrifices which took place on the death of Chief Induma. Chief Induma was a very powerful chief. It was he who led the Incan people to the site of their present town when they were driven out of their own country by the Awalas. When he arrived at the Cross River, he established the 5 compounds which still exist, and ruled over all the people. They were very fond of Induma as he was a just man. A few years after they had built their compound, the 2 adjoining countries, Inde and Akparabong, made war against the Incan. But Chief Induma, who was skilled in warfare, led his people so well and wisely that both countries were driven back, and they have occupied the land ever since. Induma had 2 sons by his wife Isibe, whose names were Agatin and Oguni. When they were grown up, Chief Induma died. All the country people were very sorry, and a big play was held, and the mourning was kept up for a long time. Then a large and deep grave was dug, and a number of slaves were killed by knocking them on the head with wooden clubs. Their bodies were placed in the bottom of the grave, and Chief Induma's body was put on top. The head chief then ordered 4 young men to be caught alive and bound. One was placed under Induma's head as a pillow, another under his feet to make him more comfortable, and the other 2 were placed one on either side of the corpse so that it was surrounded by living boys. Then the head chief remembered that Induma had been very fond of a boy named Idim, so they caught him, and having tied him up, placed him in the grave near the dead chief's head, so that he and the other 4 young men should be able to work for their master in the spirit land. As the grave was very big and deep, they put sticks across it, wedged firmly into the sides. Planks were then placed over the sticks, and the planks were covered with sand. By this time the grave was about half full, and the people left it until the next day, when more slaves were being brought in from the farms to be killed and put in the grave to fill it up. When nighttime came, Edom, who had not been very securely fastened, called to the other 4 boys, and managing to get his teeth to the tie-tie, which bound the boy nearest to him, he bit it through, and the boy who was then released undid Edom's thongs, and together they freed the other 3 boys. Edom then made a hole in the planks and sand and got out of the grave. When he had helped the others out, they all ran down to the beach, where they seized a canoe and paddled down river as hard as they could go to Akunamuna. When they got there, they presented themselves to King Aguga and told him their story. The king then took Edom as one of his boys, and finding him to be intelligent, made him his head canoe boy. After 5 years had elapsed, Edom had made a lot of money, so he returned to Ankara with the other 4 boys, knowing that even if he were recognized, he would not be killed, as the people had filled the grave with bodies the day after he had escaped. Edom very shortly afterwards became one of the head men of the town under Agate Nanguni. He married some wives and had many children, and lived to a good age. End of Concerning the Human Sacrifices that Took Place on the Death of Chief Nduma in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16. Read by Jerome Ware, San Diego, August 21st, 2022.
The Legend of Paracelsus in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16, from Folklore and Legends, Germany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Michael Broomhill. The Legend of Paracelsus by Anonymous. It once happened that Paracelsus was walking through a forest when he heard a voice calling to him by name. He looked around and at length discovered that it proceeded from a fir tree, in the trunk of which there was a spirit enclosed by a small stopper sealed with 3 crosses. The spirit begged of Paracelsus to set him free. This he readily promised, on condition that the spirit should bestow upon him a medicine capable of healing all diseases, and a tincture which would turn everything it touched to gold. The spirit acceded to his request, whereupon Paracelsus took his penknife and succeeded, after some trouble, in getting out the stopper. A loathsome black spider crept forth, which ran down the trunk of the tree. Scarcely had it reached the ground before it was changed, and became, as if rising from the earth, a tall, haggard man, with squinting red eyes, wrapped in a scarlet mantle. He led Paracelsus to a high, overhanging, craggy mount, and with a hazel twig, which he had broken off by the way, he smote the rock, which, splitting with a crash at the blow, divided itself in twain, and the spirit disappeared within it. He, however, soon returned with 2 small phials, which he handed to Paracelsus. A yellow one, containing the tincture which turned all it touched to gold, and a white one holding the medicine which healed all diseases. He then smote the rock a second time, and thereupon it instantly closed again. Both now set forth on their return, the spirit directing his course towards Innsbruck to seize upon the magician who had banished him from that city. Now Paracelsus trembled for the consequences which his releasing the evil one would entail upon him who had conjured him into the tree, and bethought how he might rescue him. When they arrived once more at the fir tree, he asked the spirit if he could possibly transform himself again into a spider and let him see him creep into the hole. The spirit said that it was not only possible, but that he would be most happy to make such a display of his art for the gratification of his deliverer. Accordingly, he once more assumed the form of a spider and crept again into the well-known crevice. When he had done so, Paracelsus, who had kept the stopper already in his hand for the purpose, clapped it as quick as lightning into the hole, hammered it in firmly with a stone, and with his knife made 3 fresh crosses upon it. The spirit, mad with rage, shook the fir tree as though with a whirlwind, that he might drive out the stopper which Paracelsus had thrust in. But his fury was of no avail. It held fast, and left him there with little hope of escape, for on account of the great drifts of snow from the mountains, the forest will never be cut down, and although he should call night and day, nobody in that neighborhood ever ventures near the spot. Paracelsus, however, found that the files were such as he had demanded, and it was by their means that he afterwards became such a celebrated and distinguished man. End of the Legend of Paracelsus in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16.
Cadmus and Europa in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16 from Old Greek Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alex Jacobuts. Cadmus and Europa by James Baldwin.
Section 1. The Bull. In Asia there lived a king who had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy's name was Cadmus, and the girl's name was Europa. The king's country was a very small one. He could stand on his housetop and see the whole of it. On one side of it there were mountains, and on the other side was the sea. The king thought that it was the center of the world, and he did not know much about other lands and people. Yet he was very happy in his own little kingdom and very fond of his children. He had good reason to be proud of them, for Cadmus grew up to be the bravest young man in the land, and Europa to be the fairest maiden that had ever been seen. But sad days came to them all at last. One morning, Europa went out in a field near the seashore to pick flowers. Her father's cattle were in the field, grazing among the sweet clover. They were all very tame, and Europa knew every one of them by name. The herdsman was lying in the shade under a tree, trying to make music on a little flute of straw. Europa had played in the field 1,000 times before, and no one had ever thought of any harm befalling her. That morning she noticed that there was a strange bull with the herd. He was very large and as white as snow, and had very soft brown eyes, which somehow made him look very gentle and kind. At first he did not even look at Europa, but went here and there eating the tender grass which grew among the clover. But when she had gathered her apron full of daisies and buttercups, he came slowly towards her. That morning she noticed that there was a strange bull with the herd. He was very large and as white as snow, and he had soft brown eyes which somehow made him look very gentle and kind. At first he did not even look at Europa, but went here and there eating the tender grass which grew among the clover. But when she gathered her apron full of daisies and buttercups, he came slowly towards her. She was not at all afraid of him, and so she stopped to look at him. He was so handsome. He came close to her and rubbed her arm with his nose to say, "Good morning." She stroked his head and neck, and he seemed much pleased. Then she made a wreath of daisies and hung it round his neck. He looked at her with his soft, kind eyes, and seemed to thank her, and in a little while he lay down among the clover. Europa then made a smaller wreath, and climbed upon his back to twine it round his horns. But all at once he sprang up and ran away so swiftly that Europa could not help herself. She did not dare to jump off while he was going so fast, and all that she could think to do was hold fast to his neck and scream very loud. The herdsman under the tree heard her scream and jumped up to see what was the matter.
he saw the bull running with her towards the shore. He ran after them as fast as he could, but it was of no use. The bull leaped into the sea and swam swiftly away with poor Europa on his back. Several other people had seen him, and now they ran to tell the king. Soon the whole town was alarmed. Everybody ran out to the shore and looked. All that could be seen was something white moving very fast over the calm blue water, and soon it was all out of sight. The king sent out his fastest ship to try to overtake the bull. The sailors rowed far out to the sea, much farther than any ship had ever gone before, but no trace of Europa could be found. When they came back, everybody felt that there was no more hope. All the women and children in the town wept for the lost Europa. The king shut himself up in his house and did not eat or nor drink for 3 days. Then he called to his son Cadmus and bade him take a ship and go in search of his sister. And he told him that no matter what dangers might be in his way, he must not come back until she was found. Cadmus was glad to go. He chose 20 brave young men to go with him and set sail the very next day. It was a great undertaking, for they were to pass through an unknown sea, and they did not know what lands they would come to. Indeed, it was feared that they would never come to any land at all. Ships did not dare go that far from the shore in those days, but Cadmus and his friends were not afraid. They were ready to face any danger. In a few days they came to a large island called Cyprus. Cadmus went on to the shore and tried to talk with the strange people who lived there. They were very kind to him, but they did not understand his language. At last he made out by signs to tell them who he was and to ask them if they had seen his little sister Europa or the white bull that had carried her away. They shook their heads and pointed to the west. Then the young men sailed on in their little ship. They came to many islands and stopped at every one to see if they could find any trace of Europa, but they heard no news of her at all. At last they came to the country which we now call Greece. It was a new country then, and only a few people lived there, and Cadmus soon learned to speak their language well. For a long time he wandered from one little town to another, always telling the story of his lost sister. Section 2. The Phthia. One day an old man told Cadmus that if he would go to Delphi and ask the Phthia, perhaps she could tell him all about Europa. Cadmus had never heard of Delphi or the Phthia, and he asked the old man what he meant. "I will tell you," said the old man. "Delphi is a town built near the foot of Mount Parnassus, at the very center of earth. It is the town of Apollo, the bringer of light, and there is a temple there, built close to the spot where Apollo killed the black serpent many, many years ago. The temple is the most wonderful place in the world. In the middle of the floor there is a wide crack or crevice, and this crevice goes down into the rock, nobody knows how deep. A strange odor comes out of the crevice, and if anyone breathes much of it, he is apt to fall over and lose his senses." "But who is the Phthia that you spoke about?" asked Cadmus. "I will tell you," said the old man. "The Phthia is a wise woman who lives in the temple. When anybody asks her a hard question, she takes a 3-legged stool called a tripod and sets it over the crevice in the floor. Then she sits on the stool and breathes the strange odor, and instead of losing her senses as other people would, she talks with Apollo, and Apollo tells her how to answer the questions. Men from all parts of the world go there to ask about things which they would like to know. The temple is full of the beauty and costly gifts
which they have brought to the Pythia. Sometimes she answers them plainly, and sometimes she answers them in riddles, but what she says always comes true. So Cadmus went to Delphi to ask the Pythia about his lost sister. The wise woman was very kind to him, and when he had given her a beautiful golden cup to pay for her trouble, she sat down on the tripod and breathed a strange odor which came up to the crevice in the rock. Then her face grew pale, and her eyes looked wild, and she seems to be in great pain. But they said that she was talking with Apollo. Cadmus asked her to tell him what had become of Europa. She said that Jupiter, in the form of a white bull, had carried her away, and that it would be of no use to look for her any more. "But what should I do?" said Cadmus. "My father told me not to turn back till I should find her." "Your father is dead," said the Pythia, "and a strange king rules in his place. You must stay in Greece, for there is work here for you to do." "What must I do?" said Cadmus. "Follow the white cow," said the Pythia, "and on the hill where she lies down, you must build a city." Cadmus did not understand what she meant by this, but she would not speak any other word. "This must be one of her riddles," he said, and he left the temple. Section 3. The Dragon. When Cadmus went out of the temple, he saw a snow-white cow standing not far from the door. She seemed to be waiting for him, for she looked at him with her large brown eyes, and then turned and walked away. Cadmus thought of what the Pythia had just told him, and so he followed her. All day and all night he walked through a strange wild country where no one lived, and two of the young men who sailed with Cadmus from his old home were with him. When the sun rose the next morning, they saw that they were on the top of a beautiful hill, with woods on one side and a grassy meadow on the other. There the cow lay down. "Here we will build our city," said Cadmus. Then the young men made a fire with dry sticks, and Cadmus killed the cow. They thought that if they should burn some of her flesh, the smell of it would go up to the sky and be pleasing to Jupiter and the mighty folk who lived with him among the clouds, and in this way they hoped to make friends with Jupiter, so that he would not hinder them in their work. But they needed water to wash the flesh and their hands, and so one of the young men went down the hill to find some. He was gone so long that the other young men became uneasy and went after him. Cadmus waited for them till the fire had burned low. He waited and waited till the sun was high in the sky. He called and shouted, but no one answered him. At last he took his sword in his hand and went down to see what was the matter. He followed the path which his friends had taken, and soon came to find a fine stream of cold water at the foot of a hill. He saw something move among the bushes which grew near it. It was a fierce dragon waiting to spring upon him. There was blood on the grass and leaves, and it was not hard to guess what had become of the two young men. The beast sprang at Cadmus and tried to seize him with its sharp claws, but Cadmus leaped quickly aside and struck it in the neck with his long sword. A great stream of black blood gushed out, and the dragon soon fell to the ground dead. Cadmus had seen many fearful sights, but never anything so dreadful as this beast. He had never been in a great danger before. He sat down on the ground and trembled, and all the time he was weeping for his two friends. How now was he to build a city with no one to help him? Section 4. The City. While Cadmus was still weeping, he was surprised to hear someone calling him. He stood up and looked around. On the hillside before him was a tall woman who had a helmet on her head and a shield in her hand. Her eyes were grey, and her face, though not beautiful, was very noble. Cadmus knew all at once that she was Athena, the queen of the air, she who gives wisdom to men. Athena told Cadmus that he must take out the teeth of the dragon and sow them in the ground. He thought that would be a queer kind of seed, but she said that if he would do this, he would soon have men enough to help him build his city, and, before he could say a word, she had gone out of his sight. The dragon had a great many teeth, so many that when Cadmus had taken them out, they filled his helmet heaping full. The next thing was to find a good place to sow them. Just as he turned away from the stream, he saw a yoke of oxen standing a little way off. He went to them and found that they were hitched to a plough. What more could he want? The ground in the meadow was soft and black, and he drove the plough up and down, making long furrows as he went. Then he dropped the teeth one by one in the furrows and covered them over with the rich soil. When he had sown all of them in this way, he sat down on the hillside and watched to see what would happen. In a little while, the soil in the furrows began to stir. Then, at every place that a tooth had been dropped, something bright grew up. It was a brass helmet. The helmets pushed their way up, and soon the faces of men were seen underneath, then their shoulders, then their arms, then their bodies. And then, before Cadmus could think, 1,000 warriors leaped out of the furrows and shook off the black earth which was clinging to them. Every man was clothed in a suit of brass armor, and every one had a long spear in his right hand and a shield in his left. Cadmus was frightened when he saw the strange crop which had grown up from the dragon's teeth. The men looked so fierce that he feared they would kill him if they saw him. He hid himself behind his plough and then began to throw stones at them. The warriors did not know where the stones came from, but each thought that his neighbor had struck him. Soon they began to fight among themselves. Man after man was killed, and in a little while only 5 were left alive. Then Cadmus ran towards them and called out, "Halt! Stop fighting! You are my men and must come with me. We will build a city here." The men obeyed him. They followed Cadmus to the top of the hill, and they were such good workmen that in a few days they had built a house on the spot where the cow had lain down. After that they built other houses, and people came to live in them. They called the town Cadmeia, after Cadmus, who was its first king. But when the place had grown to be a large city, it was known by the name of Thebes. Cadmus was a wise king. The mighty folk, who lived with Jupiter amid the clouds, were well pleased with him and helped him in more ways than one. After a while he married Harmonia, the beautiful daughter of Mars. All the mighty ones were at the wedding, and Athena gave the bride a wonderful necklace about which you may learn something more at another time. But the greatest thing that Cadmus did is yet to be told. He was the first schoolmaster of the Greeks, and taught them the letters which were used in his own country across the sea. They called the first of these letters Alpha, and the second Beta, and that is why we speak of the alphabet to this day. And when the Greeks had learned the alphabet from Cadmus, they soon began to write and read, and make beautiful and useful books. As for the maiden Europa, she was carried safe over the sea to a distant shore. She may have been happy in the new, strange land to which she was taken, I cannot tell, but she never heard of friends or home again. Whether it was really Jupiter in the form of a bull that carried her away, nobody knows. It all happened so long ago that there might have been some mistakes about the story, and I should not think it strange if it were a sea robber who stole her from her home, and a swift ship with white sails that bore her away. Of one thing I am sure, she was loved so well by all who knew her, that the great unknown country to which she was taken had been called after her ever since, Europe. End of Cadmus and Europa.
The Enchanted Princess, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16, from Myths and Folk Tales of the Russians, Western Slavs, and Magyars by Jeremiah Curtin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Justin Hayes. The Enchanted Princess by Jeremiah Curtin. In a certain kingdom, a soldier served in the mounted guard of the king. He served 25 years in faithfulness and truth, and for his good conduct the king gave orders to discharge him with honor, and give him as reward the same horse on which he had ridden in the regiment, with all the caparisons. The soldier took farewell of his comrades, and set out for his native place. He travelled a day, a second, and a third. Behold, a whole week had gone by, and a second, and third week. The soldier had no money. He had nothing to eat himself, nothing to give his horse, and his home was far, far away. He saw that the affair was a very bad one. He wanted terribly to eat, began to look in one direction and another, and saw on one side a great castle. Well, thought he, better go there. Maybe they will take me even for a time to serve. I'll earn something. He turned to the castle, rode into the court, put his horse in the stable, gave him hay, and entered the castle. In the castle a table was set with food and wine, with everything that the soul could wish for. The soldier ate and drank. Now, thought he, I may sleep. All at once a bear came in. Fear me not, brave hero, thou hast come in good time. I am not a savage bear, but a fair maiden, an enchanted princess. If thou canst endure and pass 3 nights in this place, the enchantment will be broken. I shall be a princess as before, and will marry thee. The soldier consented. Now there fell upon him such a sadness that he could not look on the world, and every moment the sadness increased. If there had been no wine, he could not have held out a single night, as it seemed. The second night it went so far that the soldier resolved to leave everything and run away. But no matter how he struggled, no matter how he tried, he found no way out of the castle. There was no help for it. He had to stay in spite of himself. He passed the third night. In the morning, there stood before him a princess of unspeakable beauty. She thanked him for his service, and told him to make ready for the crown. Straightway they had the wedding, and began to live together without care or trouble. After a time the soldier remembered his native place. He wanted to spend some time there. The princess tried to dissuade him. "Remain, stay here, my friend, go not away. What is lacking to thee?" No, she could not dissuade him. She took farewell of her husband, gave him a sack filled with seeds, and said, "On whatever road thou mayest travel, throw these seeds on both sides. Wherever they fall, that moment trees will spring up. On the trees precious fruit will be hanging in beauty. Various birds will sing songs, and tomcats from over the sea will tell tales." The good hero sat on his horse of service and went his way. Wherever he journeyed, he cast seeds on both sides. And after him forests were rising, just creeping out of the damp earth. He rode one day, he rode a second, a third, and saw in the open field a caravan. On the grass merchants were sitting playing cards. Near them a great kettle was hanging, and though there was no fire under the kettle, it was boiling like a fountain within the pot. "What a wonder!" thought the soldier. "There is no fire to be seen, and in the kettle it is boiling like a fountain. Let me look at it more closely." He turned his horse to the place and rode up to the merchants. "Hail, honorable gentlemen!" He had no suspicion that these were not merchants, but all unclean. "That is a good trick of yours, a kettle boiling without fire. But I have a better one." He took out a seed and threw it on the ground. That moment a full-grown tree came up. On the tree were precious fruits in their beauty. Various birds were singing songs, and tomcats from over the sea were telling tales. From this boast the unclean knew him. "Ah," they said among themselves, "this is the man who liberated the princess. Come, brothers, let us drug him with a weed, and let him sleep half a year." They went to entertaining him, and drugged him with the magic weed. The soldier dropped on the grass, and fell into a deep sleep from which he could not be roused. The merchants, the caravan, and the kettle vanished in a twinkle. Soon after, the princess went out in her garden, and saw that the tops of all the trees had begun to wither. "This is not for good," thought she. "It is evident that evil has come to my husband." 3 months passed. It was time for his return, and there was nothing of him, nothing. The princess made ready and went to search for him. She went by that road along which he had traveled. On both sides forests were growing, birds were singing, and tomcats from over the sea were purring their tails. She reached the spot where there were no more trees. The road wound out into the open field. She thought, "Where has he gone to? Of course he has not sunk through the earth." She looked. Aside by itself was one of the wonderful trees, and under it her dear husband. She ran to him, pushed and tried to rouse him. No, he did not wake. She pinched him, stuck pins in his side, pricked and pricked him. He did not feel even the pain, lay like a corpse without motion. The princess grew angry, and in her anger pronounced the spell. "Mayest thou be caught by the stormy whirlwind, thou good-for-nothing sleepy-head, and be borne to places unknown." She had barely uttered these words when the wind began to whistle, to sound, and in one flash the soldier was caught up by a boisterous whirlwind and borne away from the eyes of the princess. She saw too late that she had spoken an evil speech. She shed bitter tears, went home, lived alone and lonely. The poor soldier was borne by the whirlwind far, far away beyond the thrice-ninth land, to the 30th kingdom, and thrown on a point between two seas. He fell on the very narrowest little wedge. If the sleeping man were to turn to the right, or rolled to the left, that moment he would tumble into the sea and then remember his name. The good hero slept out his half-year, moved not a finger, and when he woke, he sprang straight to his feet, looked on both sides. The waves were rolling. No end can be seen to the broad sea. He stands in doubt, asking himself, "By what miracle have I come to this place? Who dragged me hither?" He turned back from the point and came out on an island. On that island was a mountain, steep and lofty, touching the clouds with its peak, and on the mountain a great stone. He came near this mountain and saw 3 devils fighting. Blood was just flowing from them, and bits of flesh flying. "Stop, ye outcasts! What are ye fighting for?" "But seest thou our father died 3 days ago, and left 3 wonderful things, a flying carpet, swift-moving boots, and a cap of invisibility, and we cannot divide them. O ye cursed fellows, to fight for such trifles! If ye wish, I'll divide them between you, and ye shall be satisfied. I'll offend no one." "Well then, countryman, divide between us, if it please thee." "Very good. Run quickly through the pine woods, and gather 100 poods of pitch, and bring it here." The devils rushed through the pine woods, collected 300 poods of pitch, and brought it to the soldier. "Now bring me from your own kingdom the very largest kettle that is in it." The devils brought the very largest kettle, one holding 40 barrels, and put the pitch into it. The soldier made a fire, and when the pitch was boiling, he ordered the devils to take it on the mountain and pour it out from the top to the bottom. The devils did this in a flash. "Now," said the soldier, "push that stone there. Let it roll from the mountain, and follow it. Whoever comes up with it first may take any of the 3 things. Whoever comes up second will choose from the 2 remaining ones, whichever he likes. And the last wonder will go to the third." The devils pushed the stone, and it rolled from the mountain quickly, quickly. One devil caught up, seized the stone turned, and in a flash put him under it, crushed him into the pitch. The second devil caught up, and then the third, and with them it happened as with the first. They were driven firmly into the pitch. The soldier took under his arm the swift boots and the cap of invisibility, sat on the flying carpet, and flew off to look for his own country. Whether it was long or short, he came to a hut, went in. In the hut was sitting a Baba Yaga, bone-leg, old and toothless. "Greetings to thee, grandmother. Tell how I am to find my fair princess." "I have not seen her with sight, I have not heard of her with hearing, but pass ever so many seas and so many lands, and there lives my second sister. She knows more than I do. Mayhap she can tell thee." The soldier sat on his carpet and flew away. He had to wander long over the white world. Whenever he wanted to eat or drink, he put on the cap of invisibility, let himself down, entered a shop, and took what his heart desired, then to the carpet and off on his journey. He came to the second hut, entered. Inside was sitting Baba Yaga, bone-leg, old and toothless. "Greetings to thee, grandmother. Dost thou know how I can find my fair princess?" "No, my dove, I do not know." "Ah, thou old hag, how many years art thou living in the world? All thy teeth are out, and thou knowest no good." He sat on the flying carpet and flew toward the eldest sister. Long did he wander, many seas and many lands did he see. At last he flew to the end of the world, where there was a hut and no road beyond. Nothing but outer darkness, nothing to be seen. Well, thought he, if I can get no account here, there is nowhere else to fly to. He went into the hut. There a Baba Yaga was sitting, grey, toothless. Greetings to thee, grandmother. Tell me, where must I seek my princess? Wait a little. I will call all my winds together and ask them. They blow over all the world, so they must know where she is living at present. The old woman went out on the porch, cried with a loud voice, whistled with a hero's whistle. Straightway the stormy winds rose and blew from every side. The hut just quivered. Quieter, quieter, cried Baba Yaga, and as soon as the winds had assembled, she said, My stormy winds, ye blow through all the world. Have ye seen the beautiful princess anywhere? We have not seen her anywhere, answered the winds in one voice. But are ye all here? All but the south wind. After waiting a little, South Wind flew up. The old woman asked, Where hast thou been lost to this moment? I could hardly wait for thee. Pardon, grandmother, I went into a new kingdom, where the beautiful princess is living. Her husband has vanished without tidings, so now various Tsars and Tsars' sons, kings and kings' sons are paying court to her. And how far is it to the new kingdom? For a man on foot, 35 years, 10 years on wings. But if I blow, I can put a man there in 3 hours. The soldier implored South Wind tearfully to take him and bear him to the new kingdom. I will, if it please thee, said South Wind, provided thou wilt let me run around in thy kingdom 3 days and 3 nights as I like. Frolic 3 weeks if thou choosest. Well, I will rest for 2 or 3 days, collect my forces and my strength, and then for the road. South Wind rested, collected his strength, and said to the soldier, Well, brother, make ready. We'll go straightway. But look out, have no fear, thou wilt arrive in safety. All at once a mighty whirlwind whistled and roared, caught the soldier into the air, and bore him over mountains and seas up to the very clouds, and in 3 hours exactly he was in the new kingdom, where his beautiful princess was living. South Wind said, Farewell, good hero. Out of compassion for thee I will not frolic in thy kingdom. Why is that? Because if I frolic, not one house will be standing in the town, not one tree in the gardens. I should put everything bottom upward. Farewell, then. God save thee, said the soldier, who put on his cap of invisibility, and went to the white-walled castle. Behold, while he was absent from the kingdom, all the trees in the garden had stood with withered tops, and the moment he appeared they came to life and began to bloom. He entered the great hall. There were sitting at the table various Tsars and Tsars' sons, kings and kings' sons, who had come to pay court to the beautiful princess. They were sitting and entertaining themselves with sweet wines. Whoever filled a glass and raised it to his lips, the soldier that moment struck it with his fist and knocked it from his hand. All the guests wondered at this, but the beautiful princess understood in a moment the reason. Surely, thought she, my friend is here. She looked through the window. All the treetops in the garden had come to life, and she gave a riddle to the guests. I had a homemade casket with a golden key. I lost this key, and did not think to find it. But now this key has found itself. Who guesses the riddle, him will I marry. The Tsars and Tsars' sons, the kings and kings' sons, were long breaking their wise heads over this riddle, and could not solve it in any way. The princess said, "Show thyself, dear friend." The soldier removed his cap of invisibility, took her by the white hand, and began to kiss her on the sweet mouth. "Here is the riddle for you," said the fair princess. "I am the homemade casket, and the golden key is my faithful husband." The wooers had to turn their wagon shafts around. They all drove home, and the princess began to live with her husband, to live and win wealth. End of The Enchanted Princess in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16.
The White Maiden in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16, from Folklore and Legends, Germany. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Michael Broomhill. The White Maiden by Anonymous. It is now centuries since a young noble of the neighborhood was hunting in the valleys which lie behind the hills that skirt the Rhine, opposite the ancient town of St. Goar. In the heat of the pursuit, he followed the game to the foot of the acclivity on which are seated the ruins of Thurnberg, and there it disappeared all at once from his view. It was the noon of a midsummer day, and the sun shone down on him with all its strength. Despairing of being able to find the object of his pursuit, he determined to clamber up the steep hillside and seek shelter and repose in the shadow of the old castle, or, mayhap, in one of its many crumbling chambers. With much labor he succeeded in reaching the summit, and there, fatigued with his toil and parched with a burning thirst, he flung himself on the ground beneath one of the huge towers, some of whose remains still rear their heads on high, and stretched out his tired limbs in the full enjoyment of rest. "Now," said he, as he wiped the perspiration from his brow, "now could I be happy indeed, if some kind being would bring me a beaker of the cool wine, which they say is ages old, down there in the cellars of this castle." He had scarce spoken the words when a most beautiful maiden stepped forth from a cleft in the ivy-covered ruin, bearing in one hand a huge silver beaker of an antique form, full to the very brim of foaming wine. In her other hand she held a large bunch of keys of all sizes. She was clad in white from head to foot. Her hair was flaxen, her skin was like a lily, and she had such loving eyes that they at once won the heart of the young noble. "Here," said she, handing him the beaker, "thy wish is granted. Drink and be satisfied." His heart leapt within him with joy at her condescension, and he emptied the contents of the goblet at a single draught. All the while she looked at him in such a manner as to intoxicate his very soul, so kindly and confidential were her glances. The wine coursed through his veins like liquid fire. His heart soon burned with love for the maiden, and the fever of his blood was by no means appeased by the furtive looks which ever and anon she cast upon him. She apparently read his state of mind, and when his passion was at its highest pitch, and all restraint seemed put an end to by the potent effects of love and wine, she disappeared in a moment by the way she came. The noble rushed after her in the hope of detaining the fugitive, or at least of catching a parting glimpse of her retreating form, but the ivy-encircled cleft through which she seemed to have flitted looked as though it had not been disturbed for centuries, and as he tried to force his way to the gloomy cavern below, a crowd of bats and owls and other foul birds of evil omen, aroused from their repose, rose upwards, and amidst dismal hootings and fearful cries, almost flung him backward with the violence of their flight. He spent the remainder of the afternoon in search of the lost one, but without success. At the coming of night, he wended his way homeward, weary, heartsick, and overwhelmed with an indefinable sensation of sadness. From that day forth, he was an altered man, altered in appearance as well as in mind and manners. Pleasure was a stranger to his soul, and he knew no longer what it was to enjoy peace. Wherever he went, whatever pursuit he was engaged in, whether in the chase, in the hall, in lady's bower, or in chapel, his eye only saw one object, the white maiden. At the board she stood in imagination always before him, offering to his fevered lips the cool, brimming beaker, and in the long-drawn aisles of the chapel she was ever present, beckoning him from his devotions to partake of the generous beverage which she still bore in her right hand. Every matron or maiden he met seemed by some wondrous process to take her shape, and even the very trees of the forest all looked to his thought like her. Thenceforward he commenced to haunt the ruins in which she had appeared to him, still hoping to see, once again, her for whom he felt he was dying, and living alone in that hope. The sun scorched him, but it was nothing to the fever that burned within him. The rain drenched him, but he cared not for it. Time and change and circumstance seemed all forgotten by him. Everything passed by him unheeded. His whole existence was completely swallowed up in one thought, the white maiden of the ruined castle, and that, alas, was only vexation of spirit. A deadly fever seized him. It was a mortal disease. Still he raved in his delirium, but of her. One morn a woodman, who occasionally provided him with food, found him a corpse at the entrance of the crevice in the wall whence the maiden had seemed to come, and where she had disappeared. It was long rumored that he had struggled bravely with death, or rather that he could not die, because the curse was upon him, until the maiden, garbed in white as usual, appeared to him once more. That then he stretched forth his hands, she stooped over him, he raised his head, she kissed his lips, and he died. The white maiden, tradition says, has not since been seen in the ruins of Thurnberg. End of the White Maiden in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16.
One-Eyed Lico in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 16 from Russian Fairy Tales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore by Project Gutenberg. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alex Yakobuts. One-Eyed Lico. Once upon a time there was a smith. "Well now," says he, "I've never set eyes on any harm. They say there's evil, Lico, in the world. I'll go and seek out this evil myself." So he went and had a goodish drink, and then started in search of evil. On the way he met a tailor. "Good day," says the tailor. "Good day. Where are you going?" asked the tailor. "Well, brother, everybody says there's evil on earth, but I've never seen any, so I'm going to look for it." "Let's go together. I'm a thriving man too, and I've seen no evil. Let's go and have a hunt for some." Well, they walked and walked till they reached a dark, dense forest. In it they found a small path, and among it they went along the narrow path. They walked and walked along the path, and at last they saw a large cottage standing before them. It was night. There was nowhere else to go to. "Look here," they say, "let's go into that cottage." In they went. There was nobody there. All looked bare and squalid. They sat down and remained sitting there for a while. Presently in came a tall woman, lank, crooked, with only one eye. "Ah," says she, "I've visitors. Good day to you." "Good day, grandmother. We've come to pass the night under your roof." "Very good, very good. I shall have something to sup upon." Thereupon they were greatly terrified. As for her, she went and fetched a great heap of firewood. She brought in the heap of firewood, flung it into the stove, and set it alight. Then she went up to the two men, took one of them, the tailor, cut his throat, thrusted him, and put him in the oven. Meantime the smith sat there thinking, "What's to be done? How's one to save one's life?" When he had finished her supper, the smith looked at the oven and said, "Granny, I'm a smith." "What can you forge?" "Anything." "Make me an eye, then." "Good," says he, "but have you got any cord? I must tie you up, or you won't keep still. I shall have to hammer your eye in." She went and fetched two cords, one rather thin and the other thicker. Well, he bound her with the one which was the thinnest. "Now then, Granny," says he, "just turn over." She turned over and broke the cord. "That won't do, Granny," says he, "that cord won't suit." He took the thick cord and tied her up with it firmly. "Now then, turn away, Granny," says he. She turned and twisted, but didn't break the cord. Then he took an awl, heated it red hot, and applied it to her eye, her sound one. At the same moment he caught up a hatchet, and hammered away vigorously with the back of it at the awl. She struggled like anything, and broke the cord. Then she went and sat down at the threshold. "Ah, villain!" she cried, "you shan't get away from me now." He saw that he was in an evil plight again. There he sat thinking, "What's to be done? What's to be done?" By and by the sheep came home from a field, and she drove them into her cottage for the night. Well, the smith spent the night there too. In the morning she got up to let the sheep out. He took his sheepskin pelisse and turned it inside out so that the wool was outside, passed his arms through its sleeves, and pulled it well over him, and crept up to her as she had been a sheep. She let the flock go out one at a time, catching hold of each by the wool in the back, and shoving it out. Well, he came creeping up like the rest. She caught hold of the wool on his back and shoved him out. But as soon as she shoved him out, he stood up and cried, "Very well, Lico, I have suffered much evil at your hands. Now you can do nothing to me." "Wait a bit," she replied. "You shall endure still more. You haven't escaped yet." The smith went back through the forest along the narrow path. Presently he saw a golden-handled hatchet sticking in a tree, and he felt a strong desire to seize it. Well, he did seize that hatchet, and his hand stuck fast to it. What was to be done? There was no freeing it anyhow.
He gave a look behind him. There was Lico coming after him and crying, "There you are, villain! You've not got off yet!" The smith pulled out a small knife which he had in his pocket and began hatching away at his hand, cut it clean off, and ran away. When he reached his village, he immediately began to show his arms as proof that he had seen a Lico at last. "Look, that's the state of things. Here I am," says he, "without my hand, and as for my comrade, he's eaten up entirely." End of One-Eyed Lico.